Okay, hello to our viewers on YouTube Live. An explanation in 2 minutes' time. I'll be switching on that transmitter and going live on radio. At about 90 minutes into this, we'll be running a discussion on air. But until then, I'll be presenting recorded material of various types related to work that I've done in the past, related also to ham radio in some ways, or sound recording, or electronics in general. So if you want the live portion of the program, skip forward 1 hour. And hello to the two viewers. 9:29, we're just waiting for 9:30 to pop round, and I'll do the opening announcement on air, which is controlled by this switch, which I'll hit in about 30 seconds' time by the looks of it. Hello, this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night transmission, and tonight a series of recordings related to amateur radio. This is VK3AML. The level was a bit loud there. Nevertheless, we've at least got the chimes this week. Been an incredible week. The Queen's husband has died. Interesting one, that. I'm not a royalist, as many of my friends know, but I do acknowledge that royalty has been significant to Australia in the past, particularly the distant past. An interesting story that my mother always used to tell. She was born in 1912 and was in naval intelligence during the war at Victoria Barracks in St Kilda Road, Melbourne. And she claimed to have met Prince Philip when he was a young lieutenant in the Navy coming into a Navy office in Melbourne. And I always thought that was a bit of a tall story. She also said that she saw him as a handsome young lieutenant in full Navy uniform on a tram in St Kilda Road when G-Day in 1995, where he talked about his Australian service. And I'll just bring up the audio of that now, if I can find it. Prince Philip, the War Years. Let's just bring it forward.
Your Royal Highness, so that was very good. Were you... was this part of your desire? Were you very ambitious?
No, I don't think so. I was quite surprised, I suppose.
And pleased?
Oh, yes.
Now, there was some friendly rivalry with a young officer, an Australian called Mike Parker, later to become your equerry. How did this rivalry manifest itself?
Well, it didn't.
Was he not on a... He was on a ship called Lauderdale, HMS Lauderdale.
Oh, right? I didn't know him at that time. I only met him in Australia when we were in the same flotilla. He was in Whirlwind, and I was in Whelp. We were in the 27th flotilla. But I mean, we saw a lot of each other after that because he was one of the ships that was in Hong Kong, and we got to know each other and played squash. That sort of thing.
Good mates.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read that as a young naval officer, you were pretty much a perfectionist. Is that the case?
At what?
A stickler for perfection.
I don't think so. Not particularly. I mean, I think everybody tried their best to make the best of the job. We had very good people.
Some might see the Navy as a rather solitary life for a 21-year-old bachelor, separated from his family, his friends by war and thousands of miles. How did you stay in touch with events back home?
Well, by letter. I don't know how else.
Who did you write to? Or?
Well, my grandmother, I suppose, most of the time, because my mother was in Athens, my father was in Monte Carlo, my sisters were in Germany, and an aunt was in Sweden, and so I mean there wasn't that I suppose in the late Duchess of Kent, who was a cousin of mine who lived here, and I suppose she was the nearest relation I had in this country, other than my grandmother, who I always go and stay with.
And you got letters from the young Princess Elizabeth too, I believe, perhaps at that time.
Yeah, so off and on.
Did they mean very much to you in those days?
Well, yes. I mean, everybody was glad to get a letter, yeah.
You had been a guest of the royal family at Windsor. What kind of wartime leaders were the king and queen in those days? What were their great strengths that you had picked up and seen?
But I only saw them off duty anyway. When they came down to Windsor for a weekend, that's as much as I ever did. I spent Christmas there once. So I never saw them in that light. I mean, they were sort of hosts on those occasions, and it was very much a sort of family party, and exactly as it might have been anywhere else. So I wasn't involved in the what you like to call it, the official activities, and I never saw them functioning, as it were, in specific or doing any of their particular duties.
We've seen great archive material of them walking over ruins in the East End. And
oh, sure.
Sort of
But I mean, I wasn't around. Well,
No.
I was, but I mean, not when they were there. I mean, I was not very far from here on leave from Rosyth, and I was actually having a bath rather comfortably in my uncle's flat in the top, well, little house he had in Chester Street. And I was lying there thinking, this is rather splendid, and wondering what I was going to do that evening when a doodlebug went past the window, and it landed just not very far away back there with a loud crump.
made you get out of the bath pretty quick and dry.
Well, I reckon it was too late by then, so I just stayed in the bath.
During the spring of 1944, your new ship, HMS Whelp, was being built in Newcastle. You spent some time around the shipyard waiting for the completion of work. Was that duty very frustrating, waiting for your ship?
No, it wasn't at all frustrating. What you had to do, a ship, while it's being built, they send a certain number of people in advance, the chief engineer and the first lieutenant, who's the executive officer, the administrative officer, on ahead to, in a sense, to supervise the final fitting out. And there are all sorts of little things. They say, where would you like this piece of kit? Where would you like that? And how would you like this arranged? And you had to, stores were coming in, you had to, so that the thing was a combination of work together with the builders, which was Hawthorne, Leslie and Hepburn, and for the Navy, if you know what I mean, for all the sort of internal naval arrangements. Then you had to write things like standing orders and look and see who we were going to get. And then people drifted in all the time, so we had to accommodate them. And I mean, it was a sort of administrative business, simply getting the ship ready for commissioning.
You're listening to VK3AML, and this is a recording of Prince Philip, recently deceased, talking about his wartime experiences, including experiences in Australia. And as I mentioned earlier, my mother had the good fortune to be working in naval office in the intelligence section during the war, and often told me that she met this young, rather attractive lieutenant who was about, I think, 10 years younger than her. And this was Prince Philip in Melbourne. Hello to Paul Taylor, Royser, and Matt Bird. Missed you last week also, Matt, but we seem to be getting a fairly constant stream of visitors on this website. I only wish that I had some means of inserting video, except for presenting it on a screen in the background. It's very primitive. What's on tonight? A bit of Prince Philip talking about wartime experiences, including experiences in Australia, which people might not be aware of. He was just a young lieutenant. Hello to Terry Sims. VK3 FTJS. Nice to see you there, Terry. I hope the audio is okay. I did a bit of a test beforehand on the stream. Oh, and for the sake of people on air, if they want to look in on what we're doing, not that you'll see much except an old bloke sitting at a microphone with some radio gear in the background, search on internet on VK3AML, 17 April 2021. That's VK3AML, 17 April 2021, and that should take you to the live stream on YouTube Live. So we're simulcasting this on 147.475 and on YouTube Live. Back to a bit of Prince Philip talking about his wartime experiences, including experiences in Australia that most people are not aware of. He, to quote my mother, he was just another passenger on a St Kilda Road tram when she first saw him in the early 1940s during the war. The next time she saw him was on the royal visit in 1954, which is an entirely different kettle of fish, when he was well and truly behind barriers and Secret Service men. Back to Prince Philip, recorded in 1995.
And you were living at that time in a boarding house?
No, in a hotel. I think it was called the Gordon Hotel, somewhere or other. I can't remember.
Sort of residential hotel.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, which probably gave you an insight into the man in the street, as it were.
The man in the street live in a hotel? Well, if you would like to put it that way. I mean, we had lots of men in the street, off the street in the Navy. I mean, most of the men in Wallace came from Liverpool. And a lot of the ones in Whelp came from South Wales. But you don't understand. If you're in the services, you meet people from all walks of life. I mean, it's you just live with them. You know, it's not the only difference is that people have different responsibilities.
So you're glad that you were in the services then?
Oh yeah.
It gave you a greater insight, perhaps, to.
Well, I didn't do it with that end in view. But
No.
That is what you get at the end of it. You get to know people of every kind of background.
Which you wouldn't necessarily have done.
What?
Which you wouldn't necessarily have done had you not been in the services.
Yeah, you could say that.
By now, Italy had surrendered.
When are we now?
D-Day was a couple of months away. From a military perspective, did you feel the tide had turned in the Allies' favour?
Well, it obviously had, didn't it? I mean,
Yes, it had.
we
but
landed.
Were you aware of it?
Oh, yes, we knew exactly. We were in, because we just commissioned, the whole of the 27th Flotilla, or most of it except for one that had got damaged, were all up in Scapa Flow. And we were the only inhabitants of Scapa Flow during the invasion, because we were literally all just been commissioned. And as soon as the invasion had taken place, and the war was moving into Europe. In fact, the naval war in Europe virtually ended. I mean, the U-boats are more or less, well, they were still being chased, but I mean, in the sense they were not as effective as they had been. Everybody's eyes, or at least our eyes, were on the Far East because the war was still going on. So we all set off and went through the Mediterranean and went to Ceylon, where the ships that were going to form the British Pacific Fleet joined together and then went out jointly via Fremantle and round to Sydney. And a proportion of ships stayed in Trincomalee in the East Indies as the East Indies Fleet, working with the Burma, in a sense, as part of the Burma War.
So what was the state of the Pacific War at this time?
Well, it was...
The Allies had begun to get on top. It was quite bloody.
Well, the Allies, it was the Americans, there weren't anybody else. And they'd got on very severely on top. They'd retaken most of the islands which the Japanese had occupied at some stage during the war. They'd worked them right back. And when we arrived, they were just invading Okinawa. And we only got in to the invasion of Iwo Jima, but that was almost entirely an air war. I mean, it was the carriers flying off aircraft for interdiction bombing and generally supporting the Americans on a flank. Because you've got to remember that there were two fleets. Well, there was one fleet in the Mediterranean, depending in the Pacific. It was either called the Fifth Fleet if it was commanded by, I think, Admiral Spruance, and it became the Third Fleet. It was commanded by Admiral Halsey. But it consisted, I think, of 4 or 5, I can't remember exactly how many, carrier task groups, and each group had 4 or 5 carriers in it. And each group had 4 or 5 carriers and 3 battleships and 5 cruisers and about 30 destroyers, all arranged in a sort of circles. And the British Pacific Fleet was one of those, and on a slightly smaller scale. We only had 4 carriers and 2 battleships, but otherwise, and it operated on the flank, as it were.
Prince Philip, of recent memory, recalling war experiences on a program for the Forces News, the British Forces News, that was broadcast in 1995 on the 50th anniversary of VE Day. So his experience was, if I could find a way of getting rid of that screen, which I don't seem to be able to do. I can't find any way of... Oh, there we go. Good. Got rid of that. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night transmission. And hello to Paul Taylor, who tells me that he can copy me on 147.475, a bit scratchy. He's in Eltham, so yes, indeed, you are in the wrong side of the hill, but with an external antenna using a J-pole. Okay, 8 metres above the ground, should be able to get me there. But, you know, the Baofeng, if you're using a Baofeng, it's not the most sensitive receiver on earth. Okay. I have a number of options now for program material, and for until 11 o'clock, I'll be running various pre-recorded bits of material, and I've had a couple of questions on the chat box beside the YouTube Live about external antennas people are splashing out apparently on radios, which is very nice. One of them is a Baofeng. And Paul Taylor tells me that my video is 7 to 10 seconds delayed on the live audio on radio. That always makes computer communication in association with ham radio a little difficult, particularly when you're trying to integrate the two. There's always a latency delay involved with digital systems. I'll just check my radio too, just to see that it's not overheating. There's a big fan, an extraction fan on the bottom of that radio, keeping it cool. And every now and then, for some strange reason, the plug that's on the back of that powers the fan seems to lose contact and the fan stops. So rather than have the radio die in a ball of flame, we keep it checked. Various bits of historical material suggested themselves this week, particularly related to the royals. I think I might take this opportunity to play a little bit of a royal involvement with broadcasting. The very first Christmas broadcast by a British monarch was done for the Christmas of 1932. That's, 89 years ago, on the BBC by King George V, who had on one occasion visited Melbourne. That occasion was in May 1901, when he was the Duke of Cornwall and York, not yet the King. And he came to open Australia's first federal parliament, which was held at the Royal Exhibition Buildings in Melbourne at that stage. But the Christmas broadcast for 1932, it's only 3 minutes, but it's worth having a listen to. The first royal Christmas broadcast, Christmas Day, 1932.
Through one of the marvels of modern science, I am enabled this Christmas Day to speak to all my peoples throughout the empire. I take it as a good omen that wireless should have reached its present perfection at a time when the empire has been linked in closer union, for it offers us immense possibilities to make that union closer still. It may be that our future will lay upon us more than one stern test. Our past will have taught us how to meet it unshaken. For the present, the work to which we are all equally bound is to arrive at a reasoned tranquility within our borders, to regain prosperity without self-seeking, and to carry with us those whom the burden of past years has disheartened or overborne. My life's aim has been to serve, as I might, towards those ends. Your loyalty, your confidence in me has been my abundant reward. I speak now from my home and from my heart to you all. To men and women so cut off by the snows, the desert, or the sea, that only voices out of the air can reach them. To those cut off from fuller life by blindness, sickness, or infirmity, and to those who are celebrating this day with their children and their grandchildren, to all, to each, I wish a happy Christmas. God bless you.
And trust me to miss a cue. The first royal broadcast for Christmas, 1932. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. I think we're all thinking a little bit of royal occasions on this sad occasion, I suppose, of the passing of Prince Philip. His funeral, I believe, is being televised later tonight. What I should do, actually, is give you a recording of the Prince of Wales, which followed that Christmas broadcast. This is Edward, Prince of Wales, 1934, who was not the brightest of the royals. Thank goodness never became the king for long. I think he was king for about 8 months in 1936 as King Edward VIII, until he abdicated in favour of marrying Mrs. Wallace Simpson. Personally, I couldn't see the attraction, but there you go. But as the Prince of Wales, he visited the slums on several occasions in London and was suitably shocked, particularly during the Great Depression, which our parents and I suppose the grandparents of many have went through in the early 30s. And the Prince of Wales gave a talk on unemployment in 1934, but what could somebody bound up with royal protocol do? This is a June 1934 broadcast by Edward, Prince of Wales, over the BBC at one of the most difficult times financially in the 20th century.
Good evening, everybody. Exactly 2 years ago tonight, I made a speech at the Albert Hall. Our economic difficulties in 1932 had reached a crisis, and we all realized we were in for a period of hardship and self-denial. But many people felt that it was not enough just to tighten their own belts. They wanted to do something more active, something more positive to help in this national emergency. In view of the fact that unemployment was one of our greatest problems, I suggested that night at the Albert Hall that the best way of helping our less fortunate neighbors was not to let ourselves be bewildered by the size of this problem, but to split it up into small parts by looking round in our own neighborhood at our very door, where we would probably find some practical task to undertake. I pointed out that few of us were in a position to plan or carry out really big schemes, but that if everyone were to tackle some small piece of voluntary service, together we might achieve a good deal. I also emphasized that what was wanted was not just a mere flash in the pan, but a determined and sustained effort in the years to come. Last year, I spoke from the BBC, where I am now sitting, telling you of the response there had been to my appeal for social service, and how I had personally visited many districts throughout Great Britain to see what was going on, and also to inaugurate a series of talks by Mr. S.P.B. Mace, which were entitled SOS, and which I hope you will remember. Well, I have again this last year continued my travels around the country, trying to encourage the activities that are in progress and to see for myself what is still needed. Although there has been some improvement in employment in some industries, the whole situation is still very serious. And although the more I go about, the more thankful I am for the voluntary activities that are in progress, I know that the real need is for regular work. That is what is wanted. And with some prospect of further improvement in trade, I urge most strongly that no opportunities of giving employment will be neglected or postponed. I say this because I do not want any of the people we are trying to help to run away with the idea that we are just satisfied in providing them with occupational centers and what they can get out of them, useful as they may be. No one wants to go on indefinitely mending boots or making bookshelves, and we realize that all these kinds of activities are only a stopgap. But another year's experience of traveling around has taught me above all that these so-called stopgaps have in most cases developed into a great deal more than that. Not so much materially as creating a new spirit of good fellowship amongst all sorts and conditions of men and women. I am glad to tell you that today there are over 2,000 active voluntary schemes in existence all over the country.
That was Edward Prince, well then Prince of Wales in 1934 in a BBC broadcast. Later, King Edward VIII. Later still, as I remember him, the Duke of Windsor. And he couldn't do a great deal to help the unemployment situation. Pensions had only been introduced in Britain in 1909, and that was, less than 20 years before. Well, just on 20 years before. A film that many people have seen related to the royals at that time is The King's Speech. And when Edward, Prince of Wales, finally abdicated in favour of his brother, the Duke of York, later King George VI, who was king from, I think, 1937 to 1951, The brother who had never been intended for the kingship had a severe speech impediment, which an Australian speech therapist treated. And what you're about to hear is the King's first speech before he'd been fully treated for that speech impediment. It was a stutter, and you can hear him hesitating throughout the speech as he tries to get through it. This is King George VI's first speech over the BBC as King on the day of his coronation in May 1937. One can only feel sorry for him on two bases. One, that he'd never been trained to be king, never expected to be king, and he certainly never expected to be in public speaking, as you will hear.
It is with a very full heart I speak to you tonight. Never before has a newly crowned king been able to talk to all his peoples in their own homes on the day of his coronation. Never has the ceremony itself had so wide a significance, for the dominions are now free and equal partners with this ancient kingdom. And I felt this morning that the whole empire was in very truth gathered within the walls of Westminster Abbey. I rejoice that I can now speak to you all wherever you may be. Greeting old friends in distant lands, and as I hope, new friends in those parts where it has not yet been my good fortune to go. In this personal way, the Queen and I wish health and happiness to you all.
And this is VK3AML. You're listening literally to the King's speech. This is King George VI doing his first broadcast as King on the day of his coronation in May 1937. The speech therapy that he was being treated for was dramatised in the film The King's Speech. It's interesting to hear the actual speech. I'll return to George VI.
And we do not forget at this time of celebration those who are living under the shadow of sickness. Example of courage and good citizenship is always before us. And to them I would send a special message of sympathy and good cheer. I cannot find words with which to thank you for your love and loyalty to the Queen and myself. Your goodwill in the streets today, your countless messages from overseas and from every quarter of these islands have filled our hearts to overflowing.
King George VI, poor chap, complete with speech impediment, which was treated by an Australian early speech therapist named Logue. And to those who've seen the film The King's Speech, you'll know the terrible problem he was going with there. Somebody on the text chat suggested that either he was with a speech impediment or drunk. Drunk sounds different, believe me. And just on that subject, one hilarious recording that's made its way to me today, just today, by email, were outtakes of an advertisement recording session done by Orson Welles in about 1980. He was advertising a brand of champagne, and he'd obviously indulged somewhat. You'll hear the outtakes first and then the final advertisement. He's advertising Paul Masson champagne. It's a Californian variety of champagne, not terribly high class. And by the sound of it, very much an appreciated product by Orson Welles. Let's hear the first 3 takes. Oh dear.
Turn camera.
Marked.
102, take 1.
With overlap, action please. Action Orson, please.
He doesn't do anything?
No, it's sorry, cut. Yeah, rolling.
102, take 2.
Ah, the French champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence. There is a California champagne by Paul Masson.
Cut indeed. Let's hear the third take. Orson was well and truly Bellotto.
102, take 3.
Action please.
Ah, the French champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence. There is a California champagne by Paul Masson. Inspired by that same French excellence, it's fermented in the bottle, and like the best French champagne, it's vintage dated. So
Cut.
Paul Masson.
Fortunately, he came back on a subsequent occasion and did it properly. This is the full Paul Masson advertisement, fortunately with Orson Welles back in better condition.
The taste of French champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence. There's a California champagne by Paul Masson, inspired by that same French excellence. It's fermented in the bottle, and like the best French champagne, it's vintage dated. Paul Masson's superb taste shouldn't be too surprising. This champagne doesn't come from France, but it was created by a man who did, Paul Masson. Paul Masson will sell no wine before it's time.
Fermented in the bottle. I think Orson Welles certainly was on that occasion. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima playing bits and pieces of audio history. Okay, enough levity. Let's go right back in time to the start of the recording industry. And there was, in the 1990s, a program on the BBC called Gramophones and Grooves. And they, in that program, in a series of 4 15-minute programs, they covered what survives of, or what was known to survive at that stage, of 19th century famous people on record. And there's a surprising amount and some very surprising survivals. One of the collections that was exposed on that program series, Gramophones and Grooves, was the Gouraud record collection. May not mean very much to most people listening, but Colonel George Edward Gouraud was a veteran of the Civil War who knew Thomas Edison when Edison was a kid as a telegraphist on the railway system in the Midwest of America. Eventually, George Gouraud went to London, set up a large house there, and became the chief London agent for the Edison Company in the 1880s and 90s. And it was in that capacity that he introduced the wax cylinder phonograph when it was developed from the original tinfoil machine in the late 1880s. He introduced the wax cylinder phonograph to Britain. So in the program Gramophones and Grooves, let's listen to the saga of Edison's London agent, Colonel George Gouraud, and some of his recordings from the 1880s.
Now stand by for the voices of Florence Nightingale, Tennyson, P.T. Barnum, Gladstone and many more. The second in David Owen Norris's series featuring 19th century recordings, Gramophones and Grooves.
The phonograph tonight is in its element. In the rooms of the Inventors Institute is where it should be.
1888. The American Colonel George Gouraud, Thomas Edison's representative in the UK, records himself in the very act of presenting a demo of the new, improved phonograph at the London Inventors Institute.
A large and appreciative audience has greeted its presence here. I will conclude by saying, yours ever, Gouraud.
10 years after his invention of the first fully working phonograph, Edison had at last created a production model in the USA using wax cylinders. A portable machine, easy to use. Gouraud then used it to record famous public figures in Britain. One was nonetheless the legendary American impresario P.T. Barnum, whose greatest show on earth was in the UK in 1889.
I thus address the world through the medium of the latest wonderful invention, Edison's phonograph, so that my voice, like my great show, will reach future generations. P.T. Barnum.
And talking of big names in the late 1880s, Big Ben in July 1890, and now. Gouraud came here to Westminster to record the Speaker of the House of Commons, the redoubtable Arthur Peel. Most of Peel's speech is now indecipherable, but you'll recognise this all right.
Order, order.
Clearly a popular bloke. But Gouraud went even higher up the greasy pole, to William Ewart Gladstone, who was just taking a breather before his 4th term as Prime Minister. A bit hard to understand here, saying he's flattered to be recorded, but still, this is Gladstone, for heaven's sake.
The request that you have done me the honor to make to receive the record of my voice is one that I cheerfully comply with. William Ewart Gladstone.
I went along to hear more about Gouraud from the actor Richard Bebb, a man with a passion for early recordings. Even before he came to England, Gouraud was a bit of a legend.
He fought in the Civil War on the northern side, was a hero, and he received the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is the equivalent to the VC. When Edison started to make his way, Gouraud became his business partner. Gouraud really took charge of Edison's European operations.
What did Gouraud use these recordings for?
Endorsements. One of the things that Gouraud did was to have an army of young men going round lecturing about the phonograph. I mean, they did it in church halls all over the country. They would let people hear these things, and they were being played on a nightly basis. They foresaw all sorts of uses. They even thought what a deterrent it would be to burglars, because you could have a cylinder machine playing and the burglar would think that the premises were occupied.
But it seems Edison didn't make recordings of famous names in the USA. No Mark Twain or Geronimo. Richard Bebb reckons it had to do with Edison's concerns about any other claimants to the copyright of a sound recording machine.
Since London was the absolute world centre for copyright, I think that Edison was terribly keen to establish in England the approval and the recognition of the great and the good.
Making his bow to royalty, Gouraud collared the Duke of Cambridge, cousin of Queen Victoria, and Commander-in-Chief of the British Army. the first royal to be recorded. You can just make out his compliments of the season from December 1888.
Hey, super Stevie, I'm wishing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Now listen to the voice of the Prince Napoleon.
Colonel Gouraud introducing Prince Napoleon, nephew of the legendary French dictator. He was invited to Edison's European HQ, Edison House, just by Trafalgar Square. The prince smoked down the phonograph recording tube in French for postérité, thanking Le Colonel for this very curious and interesting experience. A whiff of the old Bonaparte haughtiness there. Now, this will just show you what a good publicist Gouraud was. One day in 1890, a distinguished military officer came across a beggar selling matches here on Oxford Street. Round his neck was a notice saying he was a survivor of the charge of the Light Brigade at Balaclava during the Crimean War. The military man decided to form a committee to bring succour to such survivors, and Colonel Gouraud was invited onto it. He dreamt up a brilliant publicity wheeze involving the recording of high-profile endorsements both for the cause and the phonograph, says Richard Bebb.
Gouraud writes saying that he has in fact written with success to Miss Florence Nightingale, to the Poet Laureate Lord Tennyson, and to Sergeant Lanfrid, who had actually sounded the bugle at the charge of the Light Brigade.
So he'd got the nurse who was there, the man who wrote the poem about Into the Valley of Death, and the trumpeter.
And the trumpeter.
Careless, my dear old comrade of Balaclava, Florence Nightingale. Offering, 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 offering. Oh, it's a valley of death for all. Oh, it's the Light Brigade. I am now going to sound the charge as was sounded at Balaclava on the 25th of October, 1854.
Brilliant! And of course the newspapers picked up the story. Max Clifford would surely approve. Another of Gouraud's recordings opens another line of research altogether. Who might we presume this to be, I wonder?
I am deeply obliged to the Lord Mayor for his warm appreciation of my service. I have nothing more to add except warm gratitude to the Lord Mayor and to the Corporation of the City of London. And the high honour they have bestowed.
Henry Morton Stanley, who had a fame extending far beyond uttering Dr. Livingstone, I presume. That was part of a speech given at a dinner thrown by the Lord Mayor of London in May 1890 to celebrate Stanley's heroics in rescuing a provincial governor from rebels in the Sudan. This latest in a string of fearless exploits overseas prompted a very special Gouraud recording session. Collector and dealer Howard Hope has the actual evidence.
Well, here we've got a mahogany box, and these are the famous cylinders taken by Gouraud of American senators giving good luck, wishes and greetings to the hero of the day, Henry Morton Stanley.
Early in 1890, Gouraud used his influence with President Lincoln's former private secretary to get a recording of a dozen US senators gathered in Washington, D.C.
And each man is very proud to say, I knew Stanley. God bless you. Joseph R. Hawley, Senator from Connecticut. The next to greet you, dear Stanley, is Senator Ellison from Iowa. I wish to add my congratulations and good wishes. Faithfully yours, William B. Allen.
Stanley was the David Beckham of his day. Every country wanted a piece of him. You know, the image was bigger than the real man. Gouraud was Edison's publicist, so to get a whole lot of American senators giving good luck, wishes and greetings to the hero of the day on Edison's cylinder was a real scoop. You know, Gouraud was very clever at this.
Howard Hope. To gain maximum publicity, Gouraud made sure he was at Dover to greet Stanley back from the Sudan, and handed over the cylinders as the cameras clicked. But Gouraud wasn't finished even then. He recorded the music at Stanley's marriage in Westminster Abbey, a wedding present, and more publicity.
The Westminster Abbey recording put the hairs up on the back of my neck to realise that you're listening to a real wedding ceremony occurring a century and a quarter ago is quite astounding.
The bride enters to Edouard Silas's Grand March. Gouraud even supplied Stanley with a machine to play the cylinders on. It still exists, owned by Richard Bebb, kept in an upstairs Holy of Holies, housed in its original case.
A lovely thing it is. Orangey brown wood, but it's mainly glass, like a roll-top desk.
And opening the desk, there is the cylinder machine.
And presumably the latest model of 1890.
Absolutely. The great thing here is that it has the original speaking tube, which they held close to their mouths in order to make cylinder recordings.
And make cylinder recordings, Stanley certainly did. Here's Sir George Grey, who gave up exploring Australia only to become Prime Minister of New Zealand. He seems to have dropped in for tea at the Stanleys and paid tribute to his host, the man who opened a continent, Africa, of course, to his country.
How happy to be here with Stanley and his wife. Stanley, the man who opened the continent to his country. George Grey.
Then there was the famous Swedish explorer Sven Anders von Hedin, in 1898, just back from a remote part of Asia. He and his caravan of men and animals nearly died crossing the Taklamakan Desert.
Every day we lost one or two of our camels, and 2 other men died. We walked on for 6 days without getting a single drop of water. My servant was dying by thirst.
Stanley also recorded actors. Here's the most characterful clip of the programme from Constant Benoit Coquelin, who wowed London audiences in the part of Cyrano de Bergerac, written for him by Rostand.
Mais moi, la reine, chaque jour, me tuyau et ma fraise, la fraise dont l'emploi pense à lever la tête. Chaque ennemi tue est un nouveau godon qui m'ajoute une gêne et m'ajoute un rayon. Car pareil en tout point à la fraise espagnole, la reine est un carton, mais c'est une auréole.
This is Drury Lane, one of the theatres where the great Shakespearean actor Sir Henry Irving built his reputation. There's a street named after him not far away. For Stanley, Irving recorded some of the most famous Shakespeare in all of politics. Now is the winter of our discontent, with a slight hiccup at the start.
Now is the winter of our discontent, the glorious summer by this country dawn. All the clouds that tower upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean valley. Now are our proud, proud with victorious fleet, our crews at arms and up on monuments.
Actor Richard Bebb says you don't have to understand the words to get an impression of the great actor's art.
I was absolutely astonished to discover how naturalistic his style was. It's not a barnstorming kind of attack at all. It's very, very modern. Nobody has called forth the paeans of praise from his fellow players as Irving. They regarded him as a being from another planet.
So, thank God for Colonel Gouraud and his sound recordist protege, H.M. Stanley. Gouraud lived out his days in Brighton, slightly loopy, wearing a fez. Very Brighton.
I will conclude by saying, yours ever, Gouraud.
Colonel George Gouraud, the Edison agent, the Edison Company agent for London in 1890. And if people care to look in on the transmission we're doing here from VK3AML at the moment, the test, you'll actually see some of the recordings, not those particular ones, but let me demonstrate in video some characteristic cylinder recordings. If you care to look in on this and you're listening on 147.475, look for on the internet VK3AML 17 April 2021. Search for that, you'll probably find the video stream. Now, most cylinders made in the first decade of the 20th century were in, and I'll show these on webcam for those who are watching there, 5 people so far. The wax cylinders were sold in individual cardboard boxes, rather nicely decorated. This is a French one from the French division of the Edison firm. They had branches in England, Germany, France, principally in Europe. Head office was in West Orange, New Jersey, where the Edison laboratory was. And these early ones, these early wax cylinders, were recorded at 160 revolutions per minute, about twice the speed of a disc. I'm just showing the image of one I'm holding in my hand at the moment. They were about 4 inches long, about 2 1/4 inches diameter, standard arrangement, and they had in the interior a taper so you could push them onto a mandrel, kind of like the cylinder version of a turntable, which spun them at 160 RPM and then engage a head to play them. The earliest of the wax cylinder recordings were cut on brown wax cylinders, and I'm holding one up at the moment in front of my webcam. Brown wax. These were first issued in 1889 commercially and last issued as a commercial item with recordings on them in 1901. After that, they reverted to the black wax cylinders of a later period. Putting that one away. Here's a British example. As you can see, the titles are written in English, and if I can turn it round the right way, the actual title of the cylinder is printed on the lid. And this particular one is "The Campbells Are Coming Bagpipe Solo by Pipe Major Forsyth of the Coldstream Guards." And that's probably the reason this record is in perfect condition, because nobody wanted to play it and hear bloody bagpipes. Do I have anything that can play those, says Matt Bird on text. Yes, I have an Edison Fireside phonograph, an Edison Standard phonograph, a very early machine from 1902 called a Columbia Q graphophone, which I'll bring in on a future week and actually play down the microphone. They're pretty awful. I can play them electrically, and I have actually built a machine which is sitting about 10 yards from where I am to play cylinders with an electrical pickup, which really is the only way to go if you want to declick and re-equalize these. You can't do much on an acoustic machine. But those are characteristic. I'll just pull one out here. What's on this one? The titles actually are on the end of the record. You probably can't see them on the webcam, but around the thick edge of the record, they have the title. And this one is "Selection from Stage Show The Spring Chicken," played by a military band. Not exactly what you'd want to listen to every day. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night test bilge, plus a stream on YouTube Live, which you can find if you dial in VK3AML 17 April 2021. Okay, let's get around to something a little bit more in the ham radio line. No, let's take a break into something a little silly. I was at a restaurant a few days ago and a particularly offensive patron came in, and I happened to have my digital recorder with me. So if you think Australians aren't racist or xenophobic, have a listen to this bloke.
Bonsoir, madame.
How do you do, I'm sure.
Bonsoir, monsieur.
Good evening.
Monsieur, madame, welcome to the Bon Gourmet. You would like un table à deux?
Adieu. My dear good fellow, we've only just arrived. Kindly get us a table for two.
For two, monsieur, if you would kindly come this way, please.
Yes. And do stop putting on that ridiculous regional accent. It cuts no ice with me, you know.
Oh, I'm sorry, monsieur, but I am French.
I'm sorry too, but I didn't come here to listen to your problems. Kindly get us a menu.
A menu to the suite, monsieur.
Menu. Did you notice the revolting way he pronounced it? These wretched foreigners, they come over here, create unemployment, and then muck about with the English language. If I'd known it was going to be that kind of place, I'd never have brought you here, man. Oh, naughty, naughty. Sweetie Petey. It was a lovely girl. Yes, thank you. Well, what would you like, my dear?
Oh, I don't know, really.
I'm not surprised. All this rubbish, all in French. I can't make head and tail of it, I'm glad to say. Oh, don't just min about like that, man. Translate. What does all this rubbish mean?
Well, perhaps, monsieur, you would like to start with the hors d'oeuvre.
Yes, there is leftovers and garlic. No, thank you. A good solid soup will be more like it.
Well, we have a very good minestrone, monsieur.
You mean that Italian slop?
It is Italian, monsieur.
I'll have none of that. A lot of gigolos and wops all mincing about with olive oil on their hair. As we can see what kind of soup they'd make, can't we? Haven't you any decent brown Windsor? The soup of kings?
No, monsieur. But we have this delicious bouillabaisse au congre.
What the devil's that?
It is made from eels, monsieur. Very popular in my country.
Eels! Obscene French filth. Eels. Yeah. It makes you sick to think of it, doesn't it, my dear? Trust the French to turn to eels. If you'd seen their plumbing, you'd know what I meant. Well, forget the soup. What else have you got?
Well, perhaps, monsieur, you would like to try our speciality, tocinos del cielo.
What are they and where do they come from?
They are sheep's eyes in aspic.
Sounds good.
We serve it, monsieur, with a special sauce made from the blood of unborn goats.
Sounds delicious. We'll have some of that, shall we, madame?
A very wise choice, monsieur. They are the finest sheep's eyes in the world. Animals that have grazed on the highest pastures in the Sierra Nevada.
Spanish muck, is it? Dirty Spanish muck, eh? Nothing but beggars and archbishops trying to lay their greedy hands on Gibraltar. I refuse to subsidize bullfighting. Now then, what's this sparg stuff here? Sparag?
Oh, that is very good, monsieur. Spargel in Hochratsgemüse. That is asparagus, monsieur, cooked in butter and blended with delicate spices. Oh, delicious.
Yeah, where does that come from?
We have it specially flown over by Viscount.
Lovely plane.
All the way from Bonn.
Bloody Bosch asparagus, is it? I might have known. As soon as you stop bombing them, they start selling you their second-hand vegetables. Now you pull yourself together, man. Have you nothing decent to eat?
Monsieur, perhaps I could recommend a chicken Maryland.
After what the Americans did at Boston, I don't forget that easily, sir. Have you no British food?
Oh, I'm afraid not, monsieur.
Yeah, we're being colonized. That's what it is, overrun. Oh, well, if we can't have anything to eat, let's have something to drink.
To drink, certainly, monsieur. Now, what would you like? We have an excellent sauterne.
French muck.
Or some good Riesling.
Dirty German muck.
Some Spanish Rioja.
Dirty, rotten, stinking, filthy, foreign slush. What about a glass of Devon cider, eh? Glorious Devon cider. Nothing wrong with that.
I'm afraid not.
Well, blackberry wine. That's another. Mild grammar. Blackberry wine, she made.
No, I'm afraid
what can
not.
I drink with safety?
Well, perhaps, monsieur, you would like a cup of tea?
Oh, I'd love a cup of tea.
Oh, all right, then. 2 teas. Well, thank goodness there's something English in this godforsaken establishment.
2 teas, certainement, monsieur. Indian or China?
How dare you!
And as somebody has found out, Kenneth Williams from 1960. Gosh, 61 years ago. It's frightening, isn't it? VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night test. In about half an hour, we'll be opening up on 147 475 for a live discussion. Hopefully, if somebody's around on the air to have a discussion with. The intent, I should say, of this test is to, first of all, establish an audience early in the night thinking about the stuff that they've heard, and then to have a discussion about it afterwards. That, I think, was the basis of the replays that Dave, VK3ASC, did on this frequency in years gone by, and that Steve 3SL does on this frequency in another night. But really, this exercise is an excuse to get people together, hopefully thinking about the material being played. I'm just looking, here we are. This probably will take us for the next half hour into the time when we're having discussions with other amateurs on the air. This is probably the most dramatic broadcast of the 1930s. The airship Hindenburg was on its maiden flight across the Atlantic from Germany, the pride of the Nazi air fleet. And when it was coming into Lakehurst, New Jersey, where Herb Morrison was doing the radio description of the arrival, it, of course, as everybody knows, caught fire, exploded, and killed most of its occupants. And the live broadcast was going out, was recorded, fortunately. And what started out as a promotional exercise for the Nazis ended up being a description of one of the worst air tragedies of all time. The 10 or 15 seconds around the time of the Hindenburg actually blowing up is fairly well known. Yes, it's starting. Yes, it's starting. It's crashing. Terrible. My, get out of the way, please. Everybody's heard that. What most people haven't heard is the broadcast that it came from, the full broadcast, and that's what you're about to hear. May 1937, the arrival of the airship Hindenburg at Lakehurst, New Jersey, described by radio commentator Herb Morrison.
How do you do, everyone? We're greeting you now from the Naval Air Base at Lakehurst, New Jersey, from which point we're going to bring you a description of the landing of the mammoth airship Hindenburg, which was due here in America this morning at dawn, completing the first transatlantic crossing of the 1937 season. Charlie Nielsen, one of our WLS engineers, is here at my side working the controls. We both flew down from Chicago yesterday afternoon aboard one of the giant new 21-passenger flagships of American Airlines. It took us only 3 hours, 55 minutes to fly nonstop from Chicago to New York. When we landed at Newark, we found another flagship of American Airlines waiting to take us to Lakehurst with our equipment when we were ready to go. And incidentally, American Airlines is the only airline in the United States which makes connections with the Hindenburg. And as we came in for a landing on the runway of the field here at Lakehurst, we could easily see that a great event was about to take place. Last-minute preparations were being made to handle the landing of this great ship. It was just 1 year ago today, May 6th, that the Hindenburg made its first regular passenger flight to America, the flight that inaugurated the first air service across the Atlantic. So this occasion is doubly significant. It is the first anniversary of the inauguration of the service and marks the first flight of this year. The Hindenburg left Frankfurt, Germany, Tuesday evening, at 7:30 their time. And for better than 2.5 days, they've been speeding through the skies over miles and miles of water here to America. It was due to land at Lakehurst this morning at dawn, but we learned after our arrival at Newark that adverse wind conditions had been encountered over the area surrounding Newfoundland, which slowed the speed of the ship considerably. Now, when I say that it slowed the speed of the ship, by that I mean the speed of the travel over water or land. Now, the ship keeps in the air a constant speed, which is in the neighborhood of 80 miles an hour. If it is flying into a wind of, say, 30 miles an hour, as it has been all last night, the 30 miles an hour must be subtracted from its airspeed to give us the speed it travels over land or water, which would be 50 miles an hour when we make the subtraction. Now, if we had received a tailwind, one that would help it along, then we'd have added the 30 miles to the airspeed, and it would have helped the Hindenburg to travel over land at a total of 100 miles an hour. In that case, the ship would have come in ahead of time this morning, or long before dawn. The Hindenburg made its first appearance shortly after noon today over the New York metropolitan area. All during Wednesday night, Charlie Nielsen and I stayed in constant touch with all the radio communication systems, which were in steady contact with the airship, getting last-minute bulletins and so forth. And are we glad the seats in the American airline passenger office in Newark are air cushions? We warmed them plenty all through the night, believe you me. On the Hindenburg are 39 passengers and a crew of 61. The Hindenburg circled over New York and is pointed for the base here at Lakehurst, where we are now broadcasting this description. Now, you may wonder why the ship didn't land the moment that it arrived at Lakehurst. As a word of explanation, these giant ships cannot be landed, or perhaps should not be landed at midday. The reason being there are so many shifting surface winds that would bounce and toss the ship around too much. Now, it must either be landed early in the quiet of the dawn or during the quiet period just around sunset. And it's just about sunset and almost the end of twilight right now. And raining as hard as could be. Now, those are ideal times early in the morning or late in the evening. Winds and weather conditions have proven to be most satisfactory. In other words, nothing's left to chance or made subject to unnecessary risk. Safety comes first, as it always should. Now, the ship has been over the field several times. It's a beautiful field here. It's a sort of a sandy and grass combination with tarvia or hard surface runways in all directions so they can take off and land into the wind from any angle. Now, while we're waiting for the ship to come back over the airport and to come into the mooring mast, let me say a few words about the preparations which have been made here at Lakehurst. Doubtless all of you know that the great part of this naval air base has played in the lighter-than-air transportation here in the United States. The facilities are adequate for the handling of the largest airship built. Just a little piece from where I'm standing is the great mooring mast. To this mast is attached the nose of the airship. It is so constructed that as the winds change, the top of the mast can be turned, allowing the airship to swing with its nose always into the wind. Inasmuch as the Hindenburg is 811 feet long, the mast of necessity must be quite a distance from the hangar, allowing clearance of the ship if it swings around the mast. The landing crew of the airbase here is expertly trained to handle these massive ships in the sky. Each man is assigned a particular post, and when the word is shouted that the ship is coming in, this man knows just exactly what is expected of him. That's a fine crew of men, if you've ever seen one. Now, we've been told that the airship is going to make an attempted landing in the rain, and if that is the case, we're going to have a mighty fine description of it for you, because the men will have a difficulty in keeping footing in the sand, and especially since it's wet. Now, the structure is light and yet so strong in the Hindenburg. From the ground, as the ship passed us, we could see the passenger quarters. They're located just about a third of the distance back of the nose and just about a third of the distance from the keel. They're sort of square in shape and seem to extend the entire width of the ship. There are two decks, A and B, A being the main one and the one where most of the passengers assemble during the passage. Lining the sides of the deck are the observation windows. Now, they're slanted so that it will give anyone in the interior a fine view downward. And no doubt as the ship went over a number of times, the people were looking down at the great mass of humanity assembled here in the field. Thousands of people have come out to witness the landing of this great airship. Now, there's a long, wide counter inside the observation section of the ship, and you can look down to the ground below, leaning on a table. And below the table, you see a relief map of the various air routes of the world. So as you travel along in the Hindenburg, you can watch the progress shown up on this map. Deck A is the upper of the two decks, and to get to Deck B, it's necessary for you to walk through a foyer and down a pair of stairs. There you find what is really a combined smoking room and lounge. Passengers are always thrilled when Captain Max Pruss or Captain Ernst Lehmann will take you a trip to the giant airship. Through its many sections, up and down along the aluminum alloy girders, over the catwalks which lead from one area to another, and then you see a maze of bright metal girders everywhere. And after a walk through the ship, you're ready to rest, for you've covered a great amount of space, and you realize that you have traveled a great distance. Now they're coming in to make a landing of the Zeppelin. I'm going to step out here and cover it from the outside, so as I move out, we'll just stand by a second. Well, here it comes, ladies and gentlemen. We're out now outside of the hangar, and what a great sight it is. A thrilling one. It's a marvelous sight. It's coming down out of the sky, pointed directly towards us and toward the mooring mast. The mighty diesel motors just roared, their propellers biting into the air and throwing it back into a gale like whirlpool. No wonder this great floating palace can travel through the air at such a speed with these powerful motors behind it. The sun is striking the windows of the observation deck on the eastward side and sparkling like glittering jewels on a background of black velvet. And every now and then the propellers are caught in the rays of the sun. Their highly polished surfaces reflect circles of gold. Now, a field that we thought active when we first arrived has turned into a moving mass of cooperative action. The landing crews have rushed to their posts and spots, and orders are being passed along, and last-minute preparations are being completed for the moment we have waited for so long. The ship is riding majestically toward us like some great feather, riding as though it was mighty proud of the place it's playing in the world's aviation. The ship is no doubt bustling with activities we can see. Orders are shouted to the crew. The passengers probably lining the windows looking down at the field ahead of them, getting their glimpse of the mooring mast. And these giant flagships standing here, the American airline flagships, waiting to race them to all points in the United States when they get the ship moored. There are a number of important personages on board, and no doubt the new commander, Captain Max Frisch, is thrilled, too, for this is his great moment, the first time he's commanded the Hindenburg, for on previous flights he acted as a chief officer under Captain Lehman. It's practically standing still now. They've dropped ropes out of the nose of the ship, and has been taken a hold of down on the field by a number of men. It's starting to rain again. The rain had slacked up a little bit. The back motors of the ship are just holding it just enough to keep it from... It bursts into flame. It bursts into flame, and it's falling. It's crashing. Watch it, folks. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. Get this, Charlie. It's crashing, and it's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh, my. Get out of the way, please. It's bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring mast, and all the folks between it. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's place is 400 or 500 feet into the sky, and it's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. The smoke and the flames now, and the frame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the prayers are just screaming around it. I can't talk to people. His friends are on there. I can't talk, ladies and gentlemen. Honest, it's just laying there, a mass of smoking wreckage. And everybody can't hardly breathe and talk and screaming. Lady, I'm sorry. Honestly, I can hardly breathe. I'm going to step inside where I cannot see it. Charlie, that's terrible. Listen, folks, I'm going to have to stop for a minute because I've lost my voice. This is the worst thing I've ever witnessed. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm back again. I've sort of recovered from the terrific explosion and the terrific crash that occurred just as it was being pulled down to the mooring mast. It's still smoking and flaming and crackling and banging down there. And I don't know how many of the ground crew were under it when it fell. There's not a possible chance for anyone to be saved. The relatives of the people who are waiting here, ready to welcome their loved ones that came off this great ship, are broken up. They're carrying them in to give them first aid and to restore them. Some of them have fainted. And the people are rushing down to the burning ship. The fire trucks have all gone down to see if they can extinguish any of the blaze whatsoever. But the terrible amount of hydrogen gas in it just caused the tail surface broke into flame first. Then there was a terrific explosion, and that's followed by the burning of the nose and the crashing nose into the ground, and everybody tearing back at breakneck speed to get out from underneath it because it was over the people at the time it burst into flames. Now, whether it fell on the people who were witnessing it, we do not know. But as it exploded, they raced back, and now it's smoking a terrific black smoke floating up into the sky. The flames are still leaping maybe 30, 40 feet from the ground, the entire 811 feet length of it. They're frantically calling for ambulances and things. The wires are being humming with activity, and I've lost my breath several times during this exciting moment here. Will you pardon me just a moment? I'm not going to stop talking. I'm just going to swallow several times until I can keep on. I should imagine that the nose is not more than 500 feet or maybe 700 feet from the mooring mast. They have dropped 2 ropes, and whether or not some spark or something set it on fire, we don't know, or whether something pulled loose on the inside of the ship, causing a spark and causing it to explode in the tail surface. But everything crashed to the ground, and there's not a possible chance of anybody being saved. I wish I could stop in just a moment and see if I can get my breath again. And Charlie, if you'll fade it out just a minute, I'll come back with more description, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm back again. I raced down to the burning ship, and just as I walked up to the ship, climbed over the picket line, I met a man coming out, dazed. He couldn't find his way. I grabbed a hold of him. It's Philip Mangone, Angone, of New York. Philip Mangone. He's burned terribly in the hands, and he's burned terribly in the face. His eyebrows, all his hair is burned off, but he's walking and talking plainly and distinctly, and he told me he jumped. He jumped with other passengers. Now, there's a Mr. Spay. It sounds like Spay. We're not sure of it. And he also got out, and we noticed the lines, the different lines, the airship lines and the American Airways. Their ambulances are down there, and they're taking people out of the wreckage. It seems that a number of them jumped clear when the explosion occurred in the tail. Now, I've just been running up with Mr. Mangone and put him in a car. His wife and daughter met him, and I put them in the car with him and sent him to the field hospital with the other passengers who have been saved. Now, the mass of wreckage is still burning, and I want to repeat again something that I may not have gotten clear in the hysteria of the moment.
This is VK3AML, and currently we're running the recording of the May 1937 disaster at Lakehurst, New Jersey, when the airship Hindenburg burst into flames, killing most of the occupants of the aircraft. Fortunately, the guys from WAFC New York were running an acetate disc recorder at the time, so that the commentary has survived. Back to Herb Morrison, May 1937, at Lakehurst, New Jersey.
The explosion occurred in the tail surfaces. In the fin, the part that was highest, after it had nosed in to go down to the mooring mast. Now, whether something slipped in the back and caused the spark to set off the gas, we do not know. You see, they're using hydrogen in this, or they were using hydrogen in this plane, and it is extremely explosive. In fact, they wear velvet and felt shoes when working among the rafters around the hydrogen gas bag. Now, something may have slipped, causing a spark to set off some hydrogen which had leaked out into the structure. It's still burning. I don't know what is burning, evidently part of the cargo. It's still flaming 10 or 15 feet high. They're still rushing people out of it. Now, it is my sincere hope that as many as possible, and as many as I think got out, I think a majority of the passengers jumped when it came close to the ground, according to what Mr. Mangone told me. He says, thank God he jumped, and we say thank God for him also. And it's still smoking. The wreckage is smoking. They've wired all the available services, fire apparatus, and everything to come rushing in, and doctors and nurses to come down to take care of the people that are being taken out of the burning wreckage. Now, it lays 811 feet of just smoldering ruins now. I couldn't talk when I saw it. I hope that it isn't as bad as I made it sound there at the very beginning. Now, while I get my breath, I'm going to check and see if there are any more saved out of it.
You're listening to a commentary on the disaster of the airship Hindenburg at Lakehurst, New Jersey, May 1937. In 10 minutes' time, I'll be opening up on 147.475 for a QSO, for a chat. If anybody on ham radio listening to this is around for a chat, I'd very much appreciate it at that time. Concurrently with the radio transmission, we're putting this out on YouTube Live. If you care to look in, it's VK3AML 17 April 2021. So if you put VK3AML 17 April 2021 into Google search, you should find the video stream of this. If you're having trouble with the RF, if you're in a low signal area, it might be better to tune in, as it were, to the video stream, which also has the audio. Back to Herb Morrison, May 1937, Lakehurst, New Jersey.
All right, Charlie, will you please fade it out, and I'll come in just a bit later. right, ladies and gentlemen, well, we're back with another important bulletin. Mr. O'Loughlin from the Consumers Company of Chicago was one of the passengers aboard the airship when it burst into flames, and he managed to get free of the wreckage, and he's standing here right by my side. I can't ask him to go on there, but he wants me to tell the folks that he is all right. Mr. O'Loughlin of the Consumers Company of Chicago, and here is another man coming in. He's burned considerably, Mr. Otto Clemens. Mr. Otto Clemens is safe, although he's burned quite badly. Now, Clemens isn't burned at all. Thank you. He's sitting right here. That's composed. And is that his mother with him? No, that's a friend of his. Oh, Mr. Clemens, how did you manage to get out alive?
Yes, doch?
Yes.
Wir haben zu rausgekommen.
Yes.
Ich bin, was ist das Radio? Ja. Ich bin von der Passagierkammer, also oben vom Speiseraum, zu meinem Koffer gegangen. Und im Moment kommt nun eine Flamme und das Schiff fängt an zu schwanken, sinkt nach unten und ich springe dann an der Luke heraus, die unten neben der Bar ist. Unten am unteren Gang, wo jetzt die neuen Kabinen eingebaut sind. Ne?
He was on his way to his cabin when the
You tell the folks.
he was on his way to the cabin.
Yes.
When the flash came.
Yes.
And he jumped out.
He jumped out of the cabin.
Jumped out.
Yes. And he didn't get hurt a bit.
No, he isn't hurt a bit.
And
not hurt at all.
Oh, I'm so thankful for you. And you tell him in your language that we're thankful that he got out alive. And now, Charlie, if you fade it out just a minute, I see if I can get some more information. And now, friends, I want to tell you, I'm back here. I want to tell you that the wreckage is still flaming out there, but I have some very good news for you. I just came from the front of the building where they have set up an emergency station, and they claim that between 25 and 30, that is the estimate, between 25 and 30 are saved out of the wreckage. Now, I have here a total of 39 passengers and 61 crew. That would make an even 100, but they tell me there were about 106 on board, so that makes 35 out of, between 25 and 30 out of 106 so far saved and accounted for that they have been identified. It's still smoking. They can't get to the back part of the wreckage yet. It would be impossible because the flames are, let's see, about 10 or 15 feet still leaping in the air. The front part of the ship is intact for about 30 feet back. The nose of it is intact. It evidently had exploded and burned before that part of the ship struck the ground, or even though it was the first part of the ship that should have struck the ground. It didn't. The burning mass gave them a time to jump. If the explosion had occurred in the front of the airship, they wouldn't have had time to jump because it would have blown the cabin right out of the bottom of the dirigible. But inasmuch as the flaming mass held the wreckage in the air, that made it possible for them to jump, and we're so thankful because from where we could see, we thought at first every one of them and the ground crew were gone. But I guess the ground crew had a chance to get out, and it was back, just a little bit back of the picket line, so that none of the spectators got underneath the wreckage. We're so thankful for that. And in checking, not a single spectator, only the persons engaged in the lowering of the giant ship and the people who were on board. Now, we have not received any information as to whether the crew escaped, any of the crew escaped, because they were evidently up in the working part of the ship and wouldn't be down in the passenger compartment. Now, how they managed to jump, I have not been able to determine yet, unless they broke through the windows. Or there may be a possibility that the windows are open. They're open at the top so that they could climb out over and drop down, the man tells me right here. They jumped through the window. Oh, they didn't stop to open the window. Mr. Clemens here jumped right through the glass window, and it's fine that it was of a breakable nature that they could get out, and therefore save their lives. Now, we can hear the sounds as they're carrying down here beyond us to fight the balance of the fire. The people are crowded down around there. I haven't a very good vision of it. Yes, I do now, right through an open window here, and the people are divided, and I can still see the mass of wreckage burning. I'm standing in the airplane hangar, the airplane division of the Lakehurst Field.
And this is a description by Herb Morrison of the disaster of the landing of the airship Hindenburg at Lakehurst, New Jersey, May 1937. In approximately 2 minutes, I'll be opening up on 147.475 for any feedback, any discussions following this on 147.475. I'll just conclude this recording of the airship Hindenburg disaster.
It has stopped raining altogether, and it's not hindering the rescue work. If it was muddy and slippery, it would hinder the taking out of survivors. Now, I'm going to stop for a breath of air and see if I can check up and find out if any more or any members of the crew have been saved. All right, Charlie, just a minute.
That was Herb Morrison, 84 years ago at the landing of the airship Hindenburg, which of course was full of hydrogen and burst into flame. We'll now be standing by. I suppose we're calling CQ now on 2 meters, if anybody would like to chat back. Absolutely nobody there, and Paul Taylor has just informed us from the historical record that there were 35 fatalities from 97 on board. So Herb Morrison's figures are a little bit off, but of course in the panic of the moment, what can one expect? Okay, I'll make a third and final call for the moment on 2 meters. Is anybody listening out there that would like to come back for a conversation? VK3 Alpha Mike Lima standing by on 147.475.
VK3 VJS.
Thank you for saving me from ignominy, Jeff. VK3 VJS, how are you doing? I haven't heard from you for about a week. VK3AML.
I was just making myself a sauerkraut and pumpernickel and Leberwurst singer. I'm okay. Everything's okay. Oh, we've been listening, but we've not necessarily come back. But we have been listening, and I was watching last week, and I got you to smile for me. A grimace, more like it. That was very interesting about the Herb Morrison broadcast. Now, on the Idiot Box recently, they discovered some long-lost film, 8mm film, that was taken by a civilian, and it was taken at 90 degrees to the Hindenburg. Not end on, like most of the newsreels. And it definitely shows the fire starting in the rear because it broke in the middle and sagged down at the rear. And then they did extensive tests as to what caused it, and they came to the conclusion that the highly doped and painted fuselage, if you want to call it that, was charged with static electricity coming in through a storm. The two 12-ply ropes they dropped down as mooring ropes, or for handling ropes for the ground crew, were wet and conducted. They did tests, and they reckon it grounded, and a spark jumped across at the rear near the fin, and that caused it, Chris. So I don't think it was sabotage or anything like that. It was just nature earthing itself and causing a spark. And there may have been a bit of leaking gas. I find it very hard to think that something that size didn't have a little bit of leaking gas. And of course, hydrogen, as we know, is very volatile. And poof, up she went. Now, I don't know whether you saw that doco at all, but it was very, very interesting. Back to you.
Yeah, I didn't see it, but a number of people informed me about it, and that's one of the reasons I'm doing the Hindenburg stuff tonight. I had access to the original recording. It was released on LP back in the 60s, and I got a dub of that digitally, which in turn was dubbed from transcription discs, probably on acetate cut on the day in 1937. It's just a pity it had such a political effect on the whole of the lighter than air transport thing, because a number of people had staked their livelihoods on the future of lighter than air transport, particularly for freight and for long runs, particularly Dr. Hugo Eckener, who was the German, interestingly, anti-Nazi. He was very much against the Nazi Party and Hitler, who was the chief designer for the various airships. And some of his airships were so safe, they actually had to be dismantled during the war after 15 years odd of faultless service. One of those was the Graf Zeppelin, which did a couple of round-the-world trips in about 1928. I think it was the first aircraft to do so. The second aircraft to do complete round-the-world trip, though not in one hop, in a series of different hops, was Charles Kingsford Smith's plane, strangely enough, the Southern Cross, which eventually in 1930 did the transatlantic trip, which completed the round-the-world stuff that they'd already done. They'd done from San Francisco to Sydney in 1928. They then did Australia to England, I think in 29, and finally the transatlantic crossing that they did in 1930 completed the first, as I understand it, heavier than air round-the-world trip for the pride of Australia, I suppose. Paul Taylor, I note that you're saying no TX here. Jeff, who's at the other end of the transmission, is in Springvale, so he might be a little bit more out of your service area than I. I think he's running a little bit lower power too. Not sure about that. You might care to fill us in on what you're using as a transmitter there, Jeff. But yeah, there's plenty of film of the trips of the Graf Zeppelin in the late 20s, early 30s. And from what I know, it was completely safe, never had an incident. But the whole of the aircraft, the Zeppelin industry, took a hit from that crash, and of course the earlier disaster with the British airship R101, which was redesigned shortly before taking off for India, hadn't gone through adequate trials. Typical of British arrogance, they decided to send it off to India without doing the trials after lengthening the ship simply to make it longer than any previous airship for the sake of British prestige. And of course they came a cropper. It got as far as, I think, Beauvais in France, came down in a storm, and most of its occupants, with the exception of, I think, 2 or 3, were killed. So hydrogen, it's a pity that they had to use hydrogen. Most of the world's helium, as I understand it, was held by USA, derived from oil wells, I think, and USA was unwilling to sell their helium to Nazi Germany. Yet another contributing factor to the whole disaster. VK3, VJS, VK3AML. Over to you, Jeff.
Yeah, okay. I was going to mention that, Chris, about the embargo on helium. Would have been a different story, but of course helium hasn't got the lifting power of hydrogen, so they might have had to make it bigger to get the same lifting power. I don't know. I'm using a rather old Kenwood here, 2-metre job. It's TR7950, I think it is. Can't see the thing because it's under the volume squelch knob. Excuse me. But it's pretty ancient. Excuse me. And I think it runs about 25 to 30 watts or something on high power. Doesn't have a fan. It was before the days of fans, so I suppose I could put one on the back. It's got plenty of heat sink on it. But she cuts the mustard, and I've also got a encoder to go in it too, CTSS encoder, which I bought from EMDRC. I bought about 4 of them. I just haven't gotten around to wiring them in yet. They're all set on 91.5, but I'll get around to it one day. Okay, well, took a trip down to Gippsland yesterday with Adam and saw Anthony, and then we went to Roscoe's. He was in his usual position in the lounge, sitting back like Orson Welles. And enjoying the pie and pasty we supplied to him. He did fire up the SDR, and we were looking at the screen on 40 metres and 15 metres, and we even went right down to Moorabbin Airport. Oh, hang on, no, we couldn't get Moorabbin Airport, but we could get Latrobe Valley on 486, loud and clear. So he gave us a bit of a demo on that. It was very interesting. And we got home relatively early in daylight, which was good. So all in all, it was a good day. I went down the club today, and it was quite good. There were a few people there. I took my usual ice cream container of kitchen scraps and fed the chooks. Poor things hardly get any green or anything like that, so they always welcome me when I come along. Bit of shopping on the way home, and that was about it. I've been watching the Idiot Box and listening to you. What a combination. But that's about it at the moment, Chris. I'm busily organising stuff for the Hamfest. I've been through the antennas, and I've got quite a few HF and VHF and UHF antennas. The only place I could put them was in the back of the truck, out of the way. And we're working through some of the other stuff. So we'll see what happens on the 8th of May. So that's about it at the moment, Chris. VK, it's a shame there's not anyone else willing to pick up a microphone. But I don't know about Terry over there and the other chap that comes on every week. I forget his call sign. Never mind. VK3AML and any group listening, VK3BJS.
Have we got any other breakers? VK3AML standing by?
Yeah, VK3ACZ. Good evening, all.
Yeah, good day, Peter. How are you? Just in reply to you, Jeff, yes, I ran into Adam. I was up at Strictly Ham, the shop, shopping for the ANAN transceiver, getting some more information on the availability of software-defined transceivers and what they required in the way of computer backup. And I found that there were 3 different ANAN models, varying in price by a factor of about 1/3. The lowest price model required a fairly high-power external computer to operate properly. The middle range one used an i5 motherboard inside, so it was largely standalone, but moderately equipped with digital facilities. And the highest price one used an i7 motherboard inside, basically an onboard computer of considerable sophistication, and that looks like the one I have to get. Apart from the motherboard, a small control computer is required externally, and my second computer on my right could probably do that, separate to the stream that I'm running. And all you have to do is plug a screen in the back of the transceiver, and away you go. Roscoe apparently is upgrading his ANAN, according to Adam. So he's getting rid of the old one and upgrading presumably to the same one that I'm looking at. So that makes about 6 people around Melbourne that I'm aware of with that particular brand of transceiver, and the reviews have come in very favourably on it. So in spite of the cost, I'm determined to track it down, put one on order, and probably take 6 weeks to 2 months to arrive. But that's typical of anything at the moment. Over to Peter, VK3ACZ. How have you been this week, Peter? And were you listening earlier? VK3ACZ and group, VK3AML.
I'll cut clear at the moment to Chris. Time's getting on. And I'll say 7-3 to Chris and also to Peter. Cheers to all. I'm getting pretty tired. VK3VJ is clear. Good evening, all.
No worries, Jeff. Have a good one. Back to you, Peter.
Yeah, VK3AML and the group VK3ACZ returning and 7-3, Jeff. Good to hear you're aboard. I was listening. I got called away right at the end of the broadcast, which is why I'm late coming back now, but I've been listening for a while. Favourite bits of your broadcast? I think it has to be, yes, I saw the King's speech a long time ago, but hearing George VI's speech, thought-provoking. I didn't think he did that badly with it, really. I mean, if there was wholesale stuttering, yes, there are pauses between words and all that are probably would make some uncomfortable, but I thought I've heard worse speeches. I really didn't think it was so bad. Another wonderful highlight was hearing the voice of dear old Eddie VIII, and of course George VI's dad, George V. All very interesting stuff, and again, just like a gold to me. Really appreciate it. Don't know. Something else to tell you, just as an aside, invite you to the Sherbrooke Club meeting on Monday on 3RHA repeater at 19:30 hours there. Anyway, back to you with my thanks and appreciation, VK3AML from VK3ACZ.
Just as a break, Pete, 3RAJ, what frequency is that? My radio's set up in frequency measurement, not call sign.
Oh, well, you've got a couple of choices. It's the upway repeaters. It's the, on VHF, it's 146.825 with a tone of 94.8, or there's the 70 centimetre one, which is the, and I'm looking up my little Wireless Institute booklet here, because memory doesn't allow me to get that. There's the Mount St Leonard's one. Here we go. 439.750 with a 91.5 tone. Over.
Okay, I'm set up to receive both, to transceive on both, and I've got the 94.8 tone. I have an idea that was a Scout repeater or one that's privately run by a bloke up way. That's hard to say, up way. Good. Yeah, okay, and that's 7:30 p.m. Monday. I'm just putting that down. Okay, I'll try and come in on that. Have some visitors tomorrow, but Monday should be clear. Okay, yeah, the George VI speech wasn't the first time that he'd actually broadcast. He did a speech opening the Wembley Empire exhibition in May, I think, of 1924, and that's the oldest surviving recording of the BBC. The BBC, naturally getting the reigning monarch on the air for the first time, was anxious to have a permanent record of it, so they rang up his master's voice, the gramophone company, in Hayes, Middlesex, and got them to stick a horn loudspeaker radio in front of their normal recording trumpet. This is before the advent of electrical recording, which came in the next year, 1925. And they recorded it acoustically, and that survives, along with a brief introductory speech supplement to that by Edward VIII, Prince of Wales, as he was in 1924. George George V and Queen Mary actually made a disc for Empire Day 1923, which I have somewhere around. Purple label, royal purple. Load of nonsense, really. And the whole institution is an interesting historical artifact these days, and I've got a feeling that when Liz kicks off, it may not last very long as an institution in Britain, except as a historical precedent and a tourist attraction, a curiosity. Though no doubt some royalists will put my head on the chopping block and swing the broadaxe for saying a thing like that. That was a treasonable thing to say back in the 30s, not anymore. Okay, so 1930 hours. Yeah, I'll just see if anybody else is on. VK3ACZ with a pause for any breakers. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima standing by. Anybody else there?
Yeah, put me in as checking Chris on air, but yeah, I'm also online, as you know.
Okay, VK3FTJS. G'day, Terry. Nice to see you there. We've only got 6 people looking in at the moment. We did have, I think, 12 at one stage, so it varies a bit. Particularly they looked in when the highlight of the Hindenburg crash was put on. I was surprised, actually, that the numbers dropped off when I played all of that stuff of Edison's London agent Gouraud. I would have thought that recordings from the 1880s and 90s would have been of interest, particularly with Florence Nightingale and Henry Morton Stanley of the Dr. Livingstone, I presume, thing. Not to mention Sir George Grey, who was an Australian explorer, then in his 80s, I think, in about 1890. But nevertheless, the fact that his voice survives in a recorded medium at all is incredible. Okay, I'll hand it round to Peter, VK3ACZ, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and the group from VK3ACZ. And good evening, Terry, as well. Good signal, as always, from across the other side of the water there. Again, as I said to you in the last over, that I'd watched the King's Speech movie, but oh my goodness, how long ago was that? And I don't know whether that movie did what all movies tend to do now, which is you see film footage and or photographs and or audio of them. But if I've ever heard George VI's voice before, I'm not aware of it. And so, again, it was like gold to me. And when you started broadcasting that, I just smiled to myself and said, oh, Chris has done it again. You know, fantastic stuff. These glimpses from the past are just fantastic. Anyway, just as a bit of an aside for you, I've had a busy day today. DX went pretty well. The sun figures say that we're in the bit of a trough with a geomagnetic storm, but that didn't seem to worry 15, 20 or 40. I actually had a station in California relay to Harvey Bay for me because I could hear the station in California could hear myself better than the net control in Harvey Bay, Queensland. So that was pretty good. And I've got a total of 13 stations. Well, it's the first time I've worked anybody on 15 that wasn't Japanese, which was an achievement in and of itself, because I was starting to wonder if I'd ever hear any other DX on 15, especially with low sunspot numbers. But anyway, yeah, been over to the US a few times today, and also got my first 40-metre contact to Ireland, so I'm rather pleased about that, going to the old home country where the ancestors come from. But enough of the waffling about myself. Back to business with you, VK3AML from VK3ACZ.
Just left a pause to see if anybody else was going to come on. Apparently not. Interesting about the shortwave conditions. I was just discussing all of that with Slim at the shop, Strictly Ham. I think I went up there on Wednesday or Thursday. I forget which day it was. I think Thursday. And was saying to Slim that every time I hear somebody calling CQ on 40 or 20 in Australia, if I tune in on a web-based SDR from New Zealand or even from California, generally I can hear them. And people are complaining about very, very poor conditions, but I think it's more a case these days of people have forgotten to call CQ. It's become unfashionable to call CQ. Years ago, now thinking back to when I was first interested in ham radio in the 60s, you would hear people calling CQ until they were blue in the face on 40 metres and 20 metres, and usually on AM, without too much hope of a reply immediately. I blab on for about 10 minutes, CQ, 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 VK3XXX, etc. But that you don't hear so much anymore, and without people initiating conversations, it's very difficult to say that conditions are bad when people aren't actually making an effort. And I feel sure that if they did make an effort, they'd be heard. I've been doing a lot of listening on web-based SDRs because I'm curious to hear, being on the brink of buying into the software-defined option. I'm very much on the brink of listening to all of the software-defined stations I can hear operating on 80 metres and 40 metres, particularly in America where these things tend to take off first. And I've had some quite good surprises, and later on tonight when we finish chatting I might, after midnight, put on a couple of recordings that I've made off the web-based SDRs to show what I'm talking about. The great thing about web SDRs is that you can control their AGC, so consequently you can make it completely manual, eliminate the automatic gain control pumping the noise up and down between words and phrases, and it starts to sound like good quality AM in the best instances. There are some old filter rigs from the 70s that still sound like a badly trained cockatoo with a cold in the head and a sock stuck in his mouth. But generally the more recent rigs, even some of the better filter rigs, are sounding remarkably good, particularly at the bass end. There are quite a few rigs now that seem to have bass response down to about 50 hertz, which is enough to give a bit of impression of a gentleman you're listening to having testicles. VK3ACZ and group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and the group from VK3ACZ. I take your point about calling CQ. Funny thing, I will call CQ sometimes late at night, and when I get no answer, one of the things I do is get on the Kiwi SDRs and listen to myself and sound a bit vain. No, I'm just curious to know how I'm getting out. Mind you, it's kind of surprising that, I can be S9 over in Perth and over in Auckland, and I'm not heard at all in Brisbane. And the next night it'll be the opposite, but I suppose you never cease to be amazed at the strange response that you get, kind of like fishing, isn't it? You never quite know what you're going to catch. But I must confess that I don't call CQ all that often, and but it's wonderful to actually hear somebody come back to the CQ call. It really is. I spend most of my time, I suppose, what do they call it, seek and pounce, and end up being very disappointed because I get killed in the pile-ups. I really do. And I was just bemoaning the fact this morning to somebody on 80 metres that there are certain stations, and most of us would know who they are, but they work DX all day and every day. And when you get somebody overseas comes on and says, now I can hear a lot of people calling, it doesn't seem to faze these brave warriors. What they do is that they have 5-minute overs and extend things a lot. And one of them the other day was even playing recordings back to the DX station, I suppose, maybe not consciously in an effort to keep them on board, but it certainly had that effect. And of course, the conditions either change or they say, well, I've been on here long enough, it's time to go to bed or go and QRT for whatever reason, and you lose your chance. I guess the way around that is to keep calling CQ, and I will take that as a bit of a point to heed. And by the way, it's good to hear you in progress there with in consultation with Slim about getting the radio. I'm still looking forward to the broadcast, maybe sometime in the future, going out on HF. That would be wonderful to be in regional locations and away from the internet and still be able to hear the broadcast. But then I've said that to you before. Anyway, enough waffling for this over. Back to you, Chris. VK3AML from VK3ACZ.
I keep waiting for a breaker, but nobody seems to be there. I'll call Terry in a moment. With Slim, I suppose I could have individually imported the thing, but Slim knows about which import transport systems to use. He's had experience with dealing with the company before. I'd much rather import through him, even if I have to pay a little bit of a premium for it. I have had dealings with Slim over about a 10-year period. He has always honoured warranty wherever it's required. I have absolute faith in his integrity and honesty, and that's an important factor with any company that you deal with, particularly if you're dealing with expensive equipment, which I am in this particular instance. I probably won't be buying something expensive as that again for this hobby, so it has to be something to future-proof me. And I was talking actually to Mike Groth, VK3AML, over the phone about this whole software-defined thing, and I sent him all of the specs, websites related to the 3 different ANAN models. And I said to him, I particularly wanted to future-proof myself against the need to upgrade the basic equipment apart from software for the foreseeable future. And I said, what do you think of future-proofing myself with this lot? And he said with a bit of a giggle, he said, well, by the time, frightening thought, by the time you need to update this, you will be dead. There's something to think about. Anyway, VK3FTJS. Cheery little thought, VK3AML. You there, Terry?
Go ahead, Chris. Sorry, I was in and out of the room.
Oh, sorry, I was just saying. The next time I have to update from the ANAN, I'll probably be sitting with a wooden overcoat on with my own 6-foot plot. Back to you.
Oh, I'm sure it's going to last you forever, Chris.
Yeah, well, the great thing about software-defined transceivers, particularly if they're adequately equipped with an appropriate motherboard, is that the updates will probably all be in software. The hardware probably will not date. I have no doubt that software-defined transceivers will become smaller and lighter as time goes on, but whether there'll be any major changes, and less expensive, of course, because they'll be increasingly produced in quantity, I'm sure. I looked at a lecture, actually, by the RSGB on the subject, and they pointed out that the direct conversion that's used for the receivers in software-defined transceivers gives them a much larger dynamic range than the superhead would normally have. So they're more difficult to overload if they're properly designed, and the ANAN apparently is. It's designed by a consortium of amateurs and professional engineers in cahoots. And one of the engineers involved is a VK6PR, I think. And I'll certainly be writing to him to have his advice as to whether what I have in mind for this transceiver, apart from the Saturday night sessions, of course, is viable. One of the things I want to do with it is to run simultaneous audio, speech, and pictures, at the very least. In other words, digital slow scan TV on one sideband and speech on the other, so that we can at least have a conversation that carries on through the pictures. That, I believe, is possible with the ANAN. You can actually transmit two sidebands at once, given the appropriate software. VK3FTJS for comment, and then if you could hand it around to Peter 3ACZ, that'd be appreciated, Terry. VK3FTJS, VK3AML.
Yeah, not a problem, Chris, and evening, Peter. Good to see you here again, and your signal's very good across this way as well. Must have a very good line of sight to you, actually, over there, Peter. And yeah, on the ANAN stuff, yeah, too, Chris. It's going to be interesting to see what transpires, in which way you go, and also different things that you can do with it. I think you'll find a majority of the upgrades will just be trimming up certain little issues within it. And yeah, for hardware, I doubt that the hardware will change much, unless it's some sort of new digital format or something that's coming in, but I doubt that very much as well, because most of them only use like a sound in, sound out sort of thing.
No worries. Round to Peter for comment.
Yeah, I'm still getting used to the idea that it's all you'll ever need, or it'll be your last one. Yeah, sobering thoughts, possibly true. But then again, I wouldn't like to put a limit on technology. I think what we're doing already with miniaturization and all that is nothing short of amazing. I mean, I was reminded of that today when got a flat tyre in the ex-Wales car, and all of a sudden when I needed to change it, I'm going to actually find out how it is that the pressure sensors work. And it turns out that inside the valve there's a little Bluetooth device that sends a signal to the car, and it knows to switch itself on when the car's been moving for a bit. So there you go. I never cease to be amazed by what comes out. But yeah, well, it's certainly it's a major outlay that you're undertaking, and it's just good to think that you're about to finally do it, and looking forward to it. As I said, regional broadcasts of the Saturday night, my favourite program, will be just what the doctor ordered there. VK3AML from VK3ACZ in the group.
Well, for certain areas, particularly up the bush, the quality of the sideband will probably be much better than the FM. Anything more than 100 kilometres away, it definitely will be on 80 metres. And I'll be interested to see if it's at all audible in software-defined receivers in New Zealand. When conditions are good, I know that Dave 3ASC can be heard in New Zealand, no worries at all, and he's just using a dipole that's about 30 feet up. It's not half as impressive as his 160-metre vertical with top loading is. So that's well within my capabilities here of erecting. The only thing that really worries me about going 80 is that on 2 metres, largely the people that I'm talking to are metropolitan people who are experimenters, willing to try things that are unusual. Dealing with people up the bush, frequently you're dealing with a more conservative crowd. And for example, as you and I would know from the Radio Communications Act 1992, was redrafted from the old Wireless Telegraphy Act with the ban on music withdrawn. Now you're not allowed to transmit entertainment. How you define entertainment is a grey area. I mean, if there wasn't some entertainment value in even these discussions, we wouldn't be doing them, would we? But I think it's more for the department stopping competition with commercial broadcasting. Mind you, if commercial broadcasters are so, pardon the expression, piss weak that they can't compete with some amateur with a backyard setup and a computer with files in it, the commercials deserve to go the way of all flesh, really, don't they? But there is a contingent of the amateur service, particularly older people in the bush, who tend to complain about anything that they hear that's away from the norm. I know that Dave 3ASE from time to time has had cowcockies up the bush get their knickers in a knot over stuff that he transmits from time to time. I remember one particular bloke, northern New South Wales, I won't say exactly which town, I know which town. We heard him the night after one of Dave's broadcasts on 80 metres saying to his friends, "And that bloke, he's very illegal. He's not using amateur equipment." And then he talked about how people shouldn't use broadcast mixers and they shouldn't use non-directional beacons. I mean, Dave's 160 metre transmitter is a converted long-wave NDB. It's been shifted up in frequency from about 300 kilohertz up to 1.8 megs. Its modulator's been slightly upgraded by Dave. But the thing's only capable of 120 watts. I mean, we're not talking something running illegal power. So, you know, if it's home built or it's adapted from some other service, so bloody what? These people seem to think that it all has to be type approved and, you know, the old days of the PMG's department. Oh, don't start me. VK3ACZ, the group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group from VK3ACZ. Need to call Terry and come back and have another say. I'm just starting to wind down now. I'm filling in my logbook from today's big extravaganza. Oh, boy, all these USA stations. But it's also worn me out by the same note. And, yeah, I might make this my final, Chris, and bid you farewell until next week. We'll hopefully hear you on the call on Monday evening if you're available. If not, no drama. Randall runs it, and if Randall doesn't show up, it's left to Jim to do it. But anyway, it'll be good to have you aboard. And there'll be a bit of talk about us going up bush again. We've got Sherbrooke Club have got a trip out to the bush up in the high country planned for some time next month. Anyway, enough of all that. If I can bid you 7-3 and wish you all the best, have a great rest of the weekend and all that, and I'll leave it over for Terry to rest of the weekend and all that, and I'll leave it over for Terry to join you, or for anybody else who'd like to join in the chat. VK3AML from VK3ACZ. Cheers, Chris.
Yeah, cheers, Peter, and thanks for coming up. Your audio is excellent, as usual. Over to Terry. Any comment, Terry?
No, I'm right to go, Chris. Yeah, all good. Thanks for running the net and everything tonight, and always enjoyable. And yeah, Peter, enjoy your rest, and the rest of the people listening in, enjoy your night as well.
Okay, just briefly, finally, are there any other callers, breakers, candlestick makers that might like to call in before we go back to the program material from now until stumps? Is anybody else like to call in? VK3 Alpha Mike Lima standing by. That's interesting. I think there may have been somebody really weak there trying to call me. Is that would that station care to try again? No, whoever that was, you're just below my noise level, so sorry we can't make it. Just going back to responses on my text chat from Matt Bird particularly, tips on 2-meter homebrew antenna setup. Matt, you could look up quarter wave ground plane antenna, quarter wavelength ground plane antenna. It's basically a vertical antenna with 4 droopy radials. And you can make those for 2 meters on a chassis socket for SO239 connectors. Screw them on the end of a piece of coax and they'll work. I actually used one of those up the bush when I went up to a place called Swanpool, south of Benalla at one stage, and it worked okay. It was a bit of a makeshift. I think the length of the 4 droopy radials and the driven vertical element is about 19 inches for 2 meters, but you'd have to check on that. So that's a suggestion, a quarter wave ground plane. That's the simplest sort of an antenna to make up, really. Okay, there being no other callers, I suppose I can go back to recorded material. I did record some on-air stuff today. I'm just trying to find it on my list here. While I'm looking, I'll play a 1931 vintage advertisement for Astor Radio, which is announced by Ren Miller, one of the announcers of 3DB Melbourne, as it was in those days. Astor Radio.
Hello, listeners. This is AR speaking. Yes, AR. Astor Radio, which gives you the best programs. I say, just take another look at me, will you? Don't I look nice? Wouldn't I make a pleasing addition to your home furnishings? You know what Mrs. Jones will say when she visits you next week? What a lovely radio. And you will say, of course it's a lovely radio. It's an Astor, my dear. Then I'm so simple to operate by anyone without any previous knowledge of radio. Do you remember the old days of radio sets? You know, all knobs and dials and no stations. If you did get on to a station, you had to stay on in case you couldn't find another one all night. Compare me. One little turn of a knob, and in come 5 stations, one after the other, in less than 5 seconds. Another knob, and I give you volume. As loud as you like. Or as soft as a whisper. Yes. There's perfect volume control for you. But of course you'll like me best for my wonderful tone. Listen to this. Wasn't that beautiful? Did you hear the wonderfully rich fullness of those notes? That tone, real tone, to please the most cultured and sensitive ear. Do you know that on account of its natural tonal purity, the piano is the most difficult instrument to reproduce faithfully? There. That's how Astor interprets the piano. Could you desire anything more natural?
Ren Miller of 3DB Melbourne with an Astor radio advertisement from 1931. And that was recorded in the studios of Vocalion Records in Burke Street, near the corner of Spencer Street. The first studio in Melbourne to have electrical recording facilities, and those facilities were installed in 1928. You're listening to VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night bilge. Did I say bilge? I meant test transmission. I'll give you a little bit of the 3869 kilohertz net on 80 meters as recorded about lunchtime today.
Mental health hotline, that was very funny.
This is an AM net.
So I shared that with Julie and forwarded that to Valerie so she can. That was cute on text. That was a cute thing. And real good on all your stuff, Kevin. The oven and the ham and your son's kitchen and the Zoom dinner and power to the 922 and all good stuff. And I don't have a whole lot more. George, the fan's done, but I made it a long, boring story, and you're tired. I'm sorry I put you to sleep, but I don't blame you. Hopefully in the next couple of days you can rest up from all this late night and early morning stuff that you've had to do. So good luck with all your chores tomorrow, and you guys both have a very pleasant rest of your evening and sleep good tonight. Kevin, I think it goes over to you. This will be it for me. Enjoyed the chat very much, guys. WA6JKN to take it. KF6SYD.
KF6SYD, W6YEC, WA6JKN. Oh, very good, Steve. Yeah, well, May for us, it's over. I mean, we've already been on the flatten the curve, and we're on the tail end. So that's how this area here. We're going to be done here in the next week. So by May, it's coast is clear here.
That was an AM net. By comparison, this is sideband recorded off 3808 kilohertz, I think it is. 3808 sideband, lower sideband, recorded today, also on 80 meters. Give you some idea of comparison of quality, and on a good software-defined receiver, sideband can sound damn good.
So she would bring home, like if it was a rumpled loaf of bread or whatever, they would let them bring home. Oh my God, I never ate so much bread in my life.
La boulangère. That's the baker is what that means.
I would say that's as good as the AM quality. So back to sideband. This is recorded off 80 meters today. In California, I should add.
Yeah, so she used to work at night. She'd go in at like 2 in the morning or whatever it was, or 1:30 or whatever it was, and start baking, and then she'd come home, before noon.
Roger.
But she's a bummer to go shopping because, like, I'll go to Walmart and I want to get these croissants or something like that. She'll look at me. She says, "Those are horrible. They didn't proof them. Blah, blah, this and that." It's like me looking at somebody's transmission overhaul or something.
Yeah, well, it's good to know that you are, knowledgeable in a particular field. That's good.
Multifaceted.
When it comes to pastries, who cares what they look like as long as they taste good? KJ7VMP.
Yeah, that's where I'm at sometimes. I don't mind if they don't have to be proof perfect, but when you're a baker, she used to be a stickler, so
Yeah, Monty, as long as you don't eat them all the time. That's right.
Even week-old bread you can reconstitute with about 30 seconds in the nuke, microwave them.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
French bread, I used to I wrap paper towel with water, moisten, throw it in there.
Well, it's interesting. French bread, as soon as you put it in the microwave and hit it for a few seconds and it starts warming up, it becomes soft again, even without water. If it's really bad, then yeah, you have to steam it. But it's amazing, just a little heat reconstitutes that stuff. The natural oils. Right. Got a good signal tonight, Monty. You running the power? Roger that. Yeah, I can certainly tell the difference. And I changed over to my 615-foot loop. Oh, wow. Very good.
Is that what you're on now, Marty?
Roger.
Well, if an antenna can sound good, that one sounds good.
This is supposed to be 558. I screwed up, but it turned out all right.
Hey, I heard Arvind in the background. Is that you, Arvind?
Yeah, this is me, KI6MOI calling. Can you guys hear me? Over.
Well, I can't say you're booming in, but I'm hearing you.
Small can't seem to get my thing tuned up. Got to go back and tune it again, over.
I guess I'll have to ask for a few more watts. I can't quite pull you out on that one. Got a band that's kind of nudging up and down a little bit, and must be on a low point right now. Well, anyhow, good to hear your voice, Arvind. And back to Monty. That loop's always, to me, they sound pretty good. They're I think, pretty steady, and they're probably pretty quiet on your end too.
Yeah, it's not bad. I could barely hear that last guy there.
Yeah, he's down in Walnut Creek, and I guess antenna-wise and whatnot, we always have trouble copying them up here, and I think a few of the others in the Bay Area are kind of in a null. Anyhow, we hear him once in a while. Anyhow, glad to hear him tonight. Well, hey, I'm going to go for my English muffin with a little swab of peanut butter on it. I'll be back in a few.
This is KI6MI at the retune, over. Hey, Arvid, now I can hear you. Yeah, there's some problem with my tuner. It just locked up. Over. Yeah, now you're booming into Morgan Hill. Yeah, you too. You're over plus 10 here. Look. Roger that. Yeah, I heard Weldon was talking to you, but I couldn't hear you. I was like, what? That's weird. Just for some reason, I went from a digital mode. I was doing MP63, took you long, and I shut that down, and it locked up my tuner, and I had to reboot, actually, with the power down. Over. Roger that. So what's plans with you guys for the weekend? Supposed to be nice and toasty and warm this weekend, over? Well, I'm going over to Santa Cruz possibly tomorrow, and I'm going to work on the boat, and then it's looking like Sunday. I think I'm going to take it out for a Shinfra sail. Hey, I'm going to be in Santa Cruz tomorrow, over? Are you? Yeah, just for the day I'm going, driving with a friend of mine. Thought we'll just go to the Santa Cruz, over.
So that the audio is not subject to pumping AGC up between phrases and sentences. And that really does push the quality of sideband to sound more and more like AM. In fact, better than AM in terms of its ability to be transmitted interstate hundreds of kilometres without running into huge amounts of selective fade due to cancellations between the two sidebands. I've been really impressed by that, and some of those stations that you've just been listening to are using software-defined transceivers, which says a lot for them. Mind you, you're listening to it through an audio compression codec, either on internet, on YouTube Live, where we're streaming. And for those listening on the air, if you want to look in, we're streaming this transmission on YouTube Live for those who are outside the normal Melbourne 2-metre service area of our 147.475 transmission. And if you want to look in, you search for VK3AML 17 April 2021. That's 17 April 2021, which of course is now yesterday's date. We've just passed midnight. Back to the transmission that was recorded today on 3808 kilohertz, the American 75-meter band, and this is an example of software-defined radio.
I'll give you a call, and then if you want, you can swing by and take a look at my little tugboat.
All right, hey, that'd be fun. I'll call you. I think I do have your phone number. Yeah, I do have your phone number. I'll call you and tell you what time I'm heading down there. Over.
Roger that. Yeah, yeah, I got it. My son's coming out in the morning real quick, and then we're supposed to head over, so we'll see. Yeah, yeah, it's supposed to be super nice at the beach tomorrow, and it's like you can throw a rock to the beach from where my boat is.
Is there a place to park where your marina is, or?
Yeah, I got a parking pass. You get a hold of me, and I'll hook you up. You can throw it in your window.
Hey, that'd be fabulous. I love that, or?
It's not what you know, it's who you know, Arvid.
Can you repeat that?
I said it's not always what you know, sometimes it's who you know. Yeah, you can use my parking pass.
All right, sounds wonderful. I'd like to see you too and your boat, or?
Roger that. Yeah, so just give me a call in the morning, let me know, and then we'll see if we can't set it up.
All right, I will do that. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you and the boat. I've heard you so many times on the radio here. Never met you, or?
I know. It's that's the way ham radio is, though.
Yeah, we normally go to Moss Landing. I don't know, you know where that is, to do a bit of photography. But this time he said, let's go to Santa Cruz, and go along the water, and then just go and catch some dinner. In the evenings we catch some dinner, and then we come back. Or?
Yep, roger that. Yeah, I know where Moss Landing is. I like the towers down there. I like to go sailing down around. You go head out and then come back up the coast. And I've been to Moss Landing many times driving down there. We used to go to antique stores and stuff. Yeah, it's nice down there.
They have a lot of antique stores down there, Jason?
They had about 3 or 4 that were neat that I used to go down. My parents ever since I was a little kid, but I think they've slowly, attrition-wise, I'm not sure how many's left down there, but yeah, they used to have a little row of them in a couple of those old dead little, where they used to build boats, 100 years ago. They have those little areas, I guess you call them estuary parts right there off the inland.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, I like secondhand antique stores, junk stores. I like going through that stuff.
Hey, you ever go to the Gray Bears?
Yeah, I've been there several times. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there a bunch. My parents like to go shopping up there at the Gray Bears and stuff. There's if you're ever down this way, there's a lot of cool. I forget, it's like a Cancer Society one right there on Almaden Expressway, and they always got really good stuff in there too. It's a small one. I've got some neat books and trinkets there.
Yeah, the trouble with Gray Bears is their prices are not very good. I mean, they're good for them, but they're, I think they're pretty high price-wise. I've never bought I really did like looking in the junk stores in Paradise, and prices were good. But farther south you go, the higher the prices go. And so I still like to look, but there aren't real good prices around here. Occasionally you might find something in the Goodwill or something, but oh well.
Yeah, the internet's been slowly killing the good finds at any kind of a junk, because they look online immediately, like, oh, it's worth $10 million, it never makes it to the floor and stuff like that. It's unfortunate, but obviously, if you've seen my junk shelves behind me, I like to buy weird stuff at junk shops. And ever since I grew up in a house full of antiques, my parents, they weren't all antiques at the time. They were, from the 50s and the 40s and the 30s, but now, most, I don't know if I haven't bought a lamp. I don't think I have a lamp in the house that's less than 45 years old.
Oh, Roger. Well, when it comes to lamps, I like kerosene lamps, and I've got a lot of those. The regular old ones, the Eagle types and that sort of thing are what I look for. Not the new lamplight farms type, but I like the Eagle type. And then I've got a couple of the Aladdin lamps. One that's quite nice. Aladdin lamps are kerosene, but they have the circular wick and the mantle, and things put out light about as much light as a 60-watt light globe, and those are really neat. I've got one real neat looking one with a brass base and the kind of whitish whatever you call it, shade like thing over it, and then they have a chimney inside, a clear glass chimney. But that's real neat. I got that up at Redwood City one time, probably, 10 years ago or something. But the other two Aladdins, I think I got them at Orchard Supply once. Probably, 30 years ago. And they're not real fancy or anything, but they are Aladdin lamps, and they work the same way, put out a lot of light. So anyway, I just like looking at junk.
Thus say we all. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. You've just been listening to a replay of a recording made on a Californian web SDR on Moonlight Bay, I think, just outside San Francisco today. About, it would be about 6 hours ago. And most of those stations are using extended bandwidth sideband, usually about 4 kilohertz rather than 3, and extended low frequency response down to about 50 hertz as well, which just goes to show that the average quality of sideband, particularly from modern sideband transceivers, and especially from software-defined transceivers, really is steadily improving to the point where it is becoming competitive with literal broadcast quality in some cases, broadcast AM at the very least. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. Just as a comparison, I recorded VK3AJU, the late Ken Gott. And Ken used to go down every summer holiday to Erith Island in Bass Strait, just across Murray Pass from Deal Island, where I went in January. And I used to record him with a very drifty ex-services receiver, ex-Navy receiver called a Murphy B40. And I found a cassette tape of Ken that I'd recorded in 1981, transmitting from the Kent Group, Erith Island in Bass Strait, me receiving in those days near Camberwell Junction. And that's what this recording is, Ken Gott from Erith Island. I hope. we could be on the wrong channel. Just hang on.
On the vertical and try it out. It's 10-foot diameter spider web capacity hat with a much smaller coil underneath. It'll be interesting to see how it performs.
You'll notice it's much more telephonic in quality because both the transmitter and receiver are filter-based, IF filter-based, so that the audio response is much more lumpy and not as broad.
As against the present situation. So it'll be interesting to note what you're using down there for an antenna, Kent, but the ICOM's going well. Yeah, I've got a rig sitting right here now. In fact, I've got two of them sitting here right now. They're both old Kremen CTR 66s, hybrid AM marine rigs. Of course, Portland being a fishing port, those things come along here quite regularly. And I might put one into service on 1.8. What's it, about 25 watts of AM. I'm not sure whether it's plate modulated or not. I'll have to have a look inside it. But it's in very nice condition, this one. It's been well looked after, and it was passed on to me recently. So I might fire it up and try it down on this band, put a bit of AM on. The one down in the shed's in pretty good nick too, although the case is a bit rusty. And I've just passed on an old Kremen CDR. Oh, it's a valve, all valves anyway. Don't know the number on the thing. It's only 5 watts out, but I think it's 6BW6 or something like that in the file. And I've just passed that on actually to a pro fisherman who just needs an auxiliary rig. All AM, of course. But some of them like to keep them as a standby. I got the thing going pretty well too. It was a bomb when I got it. Good fun playing around with that sort of stuff. VK3AJU, portable at Erith Island. It was VK3 Roger Willie, VK3 BBS over.
VK3AJU, portable 7 on Erith Island. Yes, you're quite right. I have been on the island before. In fact, it's my visit. There's a group of us come down here and we came from, I usually come down about the 10th of September and go back after a couple of weeks and we'll stay for a month. So I was operating here last year as VK3 Kilo Golf Australia, and I had the case. The antenna is just for long wire, about 120 feet. I've got a 27-foot aluminium pole at this end that's fed from the end near the tank naturally, and the other pole at the other end is only about 12 feet, just leaning against the pea tree. There are no trees here that you can tie anything to. It's just tea tree scrub and stuff like that. There's no way you can, there's no gum trees or anything like that where you can throw a wire over the limb of a tree or anything like that. It is rather difficult to get any sort of antenna. I tried a dipole on 20 metres but gave it away. I found the long wire was just as effective. Last year I was running a 400-foot long wire.
VK3AJU Portable 7. VK3BBS, VK3RWS. Okay, Ken, I better give you your report.
Just if I can interrupt there, this is VK3AML running a test. I'm replaying from 1981, the late Ken Gott, VK3 Alpha Juliet United, transmitting from Erith Island in Bass Strait to us in Melbourne, and VK3RW or RV, I think in those days, is now VK3HP. 3HP. Trying to think of the name and can't. Grant Taylor, who now lives in Frankston, who always had a very good signal. But in those days, it was very rare that you'd find sideband stations that were accurately netted. And as you'll hear, I'm trying to chase their frequencies with my receiver in those days, which was a Murphy B40, an old ex-Vietnam War naval receiver that weighed about 100 pounds. It had a massive turret tuner in it to change bands on HF, and they drifted like an open boat, so you actually had to track sideband signals as the receiver drifted. But I did use it with an inverted L antenna at my location, which was a little bit south of Camberwell Junction in those days. So from 40 years ago, here is Erith Island in Bass Strait, Ken Gott, and Grant, now VK3HP, replying to him.
So you're 5 and 9 plus 5, going down to at times an 8, but generally staying up to 5 and 9 plus 5. Now, before I do anything else, what you probably have guessed, Ken, is that I'm running my rig totally remote. I'm actually walking around the house and doing things while I'm talking to you, but I've now put the mic onto high gain, and is it still coming through well, or is there an echo? Over?
Coming through well, very steady on 5 and 5, Grant, very steady on 5 and 5.
Tell him where your house is too. Yeah, roger there, Ken. I'm surprised I'm only 5 and 5, considering you're 5 and 9 plus 10. That's very interesting, because maybe my antenna is saving another direction. I'm using a loop antenna in Vermont. Vermont, about halfway between St Kilda and Mount Dandenong. If you if you took a line from St Kilda through to the Channel 9 mast, you'd nearly come across this area. I'm in a fairly high spot in Vermont, on the side of a hill, but very close to the top of it, in a fairly large park, especially for this area, about 6.5 acres of it. So that's approximately where I am, for what it's worth there, Ken. Okay, on your situation there, and all the scrub and tea tree and so forth, and no room to put up or no trees to hang antennas on. That's sad. You'll have to fly a kite or something and put a wire onto it. Because from that location on 160, I would expect signals to be, very strong. But you also are using an ICOM 720, which should have an output of approximately 100 watts or so. I have one of those too, but I have a linear I made up for it, which gives me 400 watts out. And I use that in the car. So you can always pick the ICOM 720. Quite restricted in the low frequency range. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they do have that.
I'll just interrupt that there. And we'll call CQ on 2 meters again, just to see if anybody's about at this time of night. It's now 12:19 a.m. on Sunday, the 18th of April. So have we got any listeners that would care to call in? VK3AML, been replaying Grant 3HP and the late Ken Gott VK3AJU. You're right, he's in Mount Eliza, Paul Taylor. So do we have any listeners on 2 meters who'd like to come back to us? VK3 Alpha Mike Lima on 2 meters FM, as well as YouTube Live. Standing by. Anybody listening on 2 who'd care to come back? VK3AML calling CQ. No, we'll keep on with the recorded material then. I'll go to something a little bit more off the wall. What have we got here? Prince Philip, Prince of Wales. Those of you who may be interested in literature, specifically Bertie Wooster and Jeeves. The author P.G. Wodehouse has always been one of the most interesting characters of the 20th century. Wrote about Jeeves and Bertie Wooster pre-war. Quintessential 1920s British characters, and then was in France when it became occupied during the war, and naively started doing a few broadcasts on German radio, not related to politics, but nevertheless it was used by the Germans as a propaganda exercise, and he never quite lived it down. So after the war he went to live permanently in America. But this is P.G. Wodehouse, the author of the Bertie Wooster series, Jeeves, interviewed by Alastair Cook in 1963.
Mr. Woodhouse, how Mildmay, Lord Mildmay, the steeplechaser, he was very much the type of Bertie Wooster.
Do you find that since the second...
I keep getting a lot of letters from India.
Well, do they see these books for what they are? I mean, or do they take them very seriously as social documents?
Oh, I shouldn't think that's possible, is it? I think they must... Oh, I shouldn't think that's possible, is it? I think they must read them just as farces. I don't suppose they think they're sort of satirical stuff.
Do the communist countries buy them?
They've started again now. I was banned in Hungary. Do you remember a few years ago? Great number of English authors were banned in Hungary. I was one of them. I suppose they thought my stuff was too little about the proletariat and too much about the earls and dukes and
but
so on.
Couldn't they, couldn't, for instance, a communist country pretend to the readers that this was an accurate or a devastating picture of the
Yes, I
decadence
suppose they
of the upper
could,
classes?
yes.
Well, now, how about the translations? This must be a tremendous feat.
Yes, I think they miss an awful lot, you know. Husband wrote a thing in Punch some years ago about my stuff translated into French, and he showed how they, whenever they came to a difficult bit, they rather apt to dodge it. You know, they'd put down something that much straighter than what I'd written.
Well,
because
now-
they couldn't get the slang, I suppose.
Of the elements of your own comic style, it strikes me more and more in reading the latest book that probably you're the only man who's ever combined this very formal and polished 19th century style with contemporary English slang, with American contemporary slang. Now, you must have been aware of that all through your life.
I suppose so, yes.
Because you came here very young, didn't you?
Yes, I was about 23, I think, when I first came here.
But I've noticed in this book, it's possible to go along and pick out words like guff and lark and the lads, which is pure English.
Yes.
And then to pick out the most contemporary American slang, which is woven in correctly.
Yes.
You see what I mean?
Oh, yes.
Do you miss living in England?
Well, not really. You see, I never have lived in England very much. I was in France for so many years, and then I was over here.
Well, would you attribute your ability to freeze and immortalize an English type to the fact that you weren't too close to it?
Oh, I think so, especially my sort of stuff, because, I mean, I'm the first to admit it's not true to life. I mean, it's probably Edwardian. Though I met a fellow like Bertie, well, there wouldn't be any Berties now, would there? Not with valets like Jeeves.
Nobody's ever...
A young bachelor wouldn't have a valet now, would he? And of course, in my day, they all did.
But there are still in the United States, I'm always staggered to go into, occasionally, into big houses and find that the last of the Jeeves are in the United States.
They are, yes, that's perfectly true. But isn't it true that the butler is creeping back a little in England now?
Well, there's a book written, I don't know if you know it, called What the Butler Saw.
Oh, yes, rather. I read
It's a
that.
wonderful history, isn't it?
Isn't it?
And there's a sort of preliminary thesis there that the automation is going to throw so many people out of work that by 2000, every middle-class family will need to have 4 servants to keep people employed. So there may be a tremendous revival in Jeeves. It may set the model. Something else occurred to me. I wondered if the literary origin of Wooster was not in Dombey and Son, in Mr. Toots.
Might quite easily have been.
Toots
I
is the
think it's
Brighton
much
Academy.
more likely to have started with the old Gaiety shows, you know, George Grossmith and G.P. Huntley and people like that. It's difficult to say how one gets a character.
But
I think a character develops very much as you go on writing book after book about it. Of course, with my stuff, I always try to get the love story set first.
The plot.
I think it was Guy Bolton used to say that get your love story right and the comedy will take care of itself. It doesn't actually, but it's a very good rule to go by. I mean, it makes a sort of solid foundation for a book.
Do you have any feeling about repeating yourself, or are there any books that you've forgotten completely that you wrote?
It's a nightmare, that repeating oneself. You know, it's awful when you're writing a book. I don't think it happened with this one, but with the one I've got coming out next year, I suddenly found there were long passages in it which occurred in other books of mine. And yet you can't, if you've written 82 books, you can't reread them all.
Over to see
before you start writing the new one.
Well, is this the matter that the plot suggested the same approach, or this was actual
It
total
wasn't the
recall?
plot so much, it's phrases like throwing a purse of gold, or what's another one I'm very fond of?
Are you ever inclined to make a big jump into completely contemporary material?
Well, I'm not sure I can manage it. This one's coming out next year. There's nothing to date it at all. It could all have happened yesterday.
But I mean, you're not moved by things like astronauts or urban renewal?
Oh, no. Oh, I feel much happier with the sort of atmosphere I'm accustomed to.
Since the...
That was P.G. Wodehouse talking to Alastair Cook in 1963. Now that we're well past midnight, midnight now, on Sunday, you should be all going to church tomorrow, or today, I should say. Shame on you all. The next record I'll play, getting a little bit emboldened by the lateness of the hour, is one of these. This is what's called an Edison diamond disc, so called because in a time when shellac discs playing with steel needles were the rule, The Edison product, which was totally non-standard, played only on Edison phonographs, totally non-standard, were made of condensite varnish, which is a thermosetting. Occasionally he speaks to a chap in northern Tasmania on 630 metres, and you can talk on that band by ground wave any time of the day and night. Anyway, just getting back to this record, these Edison diamond discs, which played on the on a diamond needle in the 1910s and 20s, they were withdrawn finally when the Edison company went belly up for the home music entertainment side of things in May 1929. That this particular disc I'm holding up is about 1923 vintage. You'll notice that the discs are 1/4 inch thick. The idea of that was when you lowered your diamond stylus onto this by the special Edison player, you wouldn't lower the diamond stylus onto the felt turntable mat and knock the diamond about. So they had method in their madness. But Edison discs, being Hillendale, were quite high in quality. And here is an example from towards the end of the Edison Company's existence, Rose Room, played by a group under the direction of Mel Morris called the Piccadilly Players. This is VK3AML now testing. From 1928, an Edison diamond disc Hillendale cut, sounding remarkably fresh considering it was recorded 93 years ago. And that upload done by one of my friends on internet, whose name I've just blanked on at the moment. I think it was Jonathan Holmes. VK3AML with a test. We're currently also radiating this on YouTube Live. If you look for us on VK3AML 17 April 2021, you should find us on Google search. And I'm just trying to work out a way of getting that off the screen so I can, and I'm just trying to work out a way of getting that off the screen so I can go to another recording of a broadcast from 1929. Charles Kingsford Smith, and a number of people went searching for him in planes in Central Australia, and one of them crashed. Kingsford Smith had to go to court in an investigation that had him implicated in the death of the guy searching for him, as if it was a put-up job. But here is Kingsford Smith at Mascot with Charlie Ulm just before the takeoff in March 1929.
I do sincerely hope that the good wishes showered on our little party will come to fruition by a successful landing in that little island not weeks that divide us from the hub of the world. The Southern Cross is in splendid condition, and we look forward The Southern Cross is in splendid condition, and we look forward confidently to a very successful journey. Cheerio, everybody.
Interesting point about that disc. Many years ago, maybe 40 years ago, I think, I was visiting a blind audio engineer named Bill Turnbull in Mosman in Sydney. And he pulled out a turntable. It had a massive Palard spring-wound motor driving the very thick platter, and another motor, also spring-wound, driving very thick platter, and another motor, also spring-wound, driving what's called a traverser gear for cutting records. And I said to him, what was this made for? He said it was made for Columbia Records in 1929 to cut the record of Smithy out at Mascot. So I actually have handled the recording machine, or at least the mechanics of the recording machine that cut that disc you've just heard. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, winding up the night's transmissions with bits and pieces, a miscellany. What else can we play to take us out? A few other bits and pieces yet. Marconi. Guglielmo Marconi did a transmission in 1935, shortly before he died, from his yacht, the Elettra, which was moored in Italian waters in the Mediterranean, directing a celebration of the 20th anniversary, I think it was, or was it? Not quite sure, around about that, of first linking of his stations in England with those of Sir Ernest Fisk in Australia at Warunga in Sydney. And Fisk, on behalf of his company, AWA, got them to record the transmission by Marconi. And when I was up at the National Library years ago, I managed to get a dub of the record.
Ladies and gentlemen, and our Australian friends, it gives me very great pleasure to be able to take some part in your ceremony today, after nearly 20 years since I directed the transmissions from the high-powered station at Carnarvon, which resulted in the conveyance of the first direct wireless telegraph message to reach Australia from England and Europe. Over a considerable period, In fact, since the closing years of the last century, I have striven to give the world improved and cheaper means of communication by electrical transmissions through space. Not a little of this time had been devoted to the development of systems which would afford mariners a surer and safer aid to navigation, and thereby a larger measure of safety and security for the passengers who traveled with them. My work in the cause of navigators on sea and in the air is not yet finished. It is natural that I should also have devoted considerable time and research to methods which would bring distant countries of the world into closer and more intimate touch with one another. There were many people, some I am afraid of high technical achievement, who discounted my ideas, but encouraged by the results of my early experiments, and happily by so many who followed and appreciated my work, I could not be satisfied until my theories and ideas have been put to a practical test. In 1918, when I decided to make my first series of tests in an endeavor to reach Australia without the assistance of intermediate stations, I found Mr. Fisk, who is with you now, ready to bring to the experiment the wealth of knowledge and experience which he had accumulated. And on the 22nd of September of that year, 2 messages were transmitted from Carnarvon, from the Carnarvon station, by means of a 200 kilowatt multiple spark discharger, and received by Mr. Fisk without any error at the experimental wireless station attached to his residence at Wahunga, North Sydney. It should be noted that in the case of my first transmission across the Atlantic Ocean in 1912, and as in that to Australia, which is almost to the antipodes, the spark system was employed, which proves that the capabilities of electric waves to traverse worldwide distances was discovered by me long before the utilization of thermoionic valves for transmission over any similar great distances. On your monument today is recorded the test of the first radio telegram to reach Australia direct from England as the result of those experiments. In a very much shorter time than it takes to read it, that message had covered the approximately 12,000 miles or more in its travel from the homeland, and thus was laid the foundation of a speedy and highly efficient system of wireless communication which today connects you with the capital of your empire and with other countries, serving so well the interests of mankind. Australia is indeed to be congratulated for having still at its disposal the services of so distinguished an engineer as Mr. E.T. Fisk, whose skill and research have been of inestimable value in bringing your wireless communication to its present high level of efficiency. I send him my most cordial regards. In conclusion, may I say that it has given me genuine pleasure to be associated with the unveiling today of the Wahunga Monument, to mark the now historic spot which had so important a part in my earlier experiments. It is indeed gratifying to me to know that the people of Australia appreciate
Melbourne, where all my friends were. Of course, at the age of 26, 27, you really do need your friends, and being in Canberra was just too isolating, particularly in those days. But I can still remember Philip Jeeves, who was AWA's then archivist, ringing up and saying that the AWA had decided to divest themselves of their print and sound recording archive. Would the National Library be interested? And they certainly were. I, on the staff, was probably more interested in the radio-related material than most, And I got Peter Burgess, my boss at that stage, to take me out to the store, the off-site store, and I think it was somewhere down near where the old railway station was in Canberra years ago, somewhere out past Marnica from memory. And we had a look through one of the big tea chests that Philip Jeeves had sent down from Sydney, and that record was dated earlier than most of the contents of the box, so we took that out and made a dub of it. I remember dubbing other stuff, test recordings cut off air, mostly from 2CH for some strange reason. And somewhere or other I have a tape of some of those. I'll have to dig it out and play it for you at some stage. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima testing on 147.475 as we come up to 1 o'clock. The people who've persisted with us this long, up to 1 o'clock. The people who've persisted with us this long, those who complain about anything that's out of the ordinary on ham radio, tend to have gone to bed by this time of the night. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima testing on 147.475 and on YouTube Live. And no, we're not the NBC, but I like to throw in the chimes occasionally. This is an oddity that I thought I might play, particularly with regards to the American political situation as it is today, with politicians of the caliber that we do not have today. This is the earliest surviving recording of Franklin Delano Roosevelt when he was a minor government official in 1920, 101 years ago. If only we had people like Roosevelt, who even in that minor government...
which called forth every resource, every effort on the part of the whole population. The war was won by Republicans as well as by Democrats. Men of all parties served in our armed forces. Men and women of all parties served the government at home. They strived honestly as Americans, not as mere partisans. Republicans and Democrats alike worked in administrative positions, raised Liberty loans, administered food control, toiled in munition plants, built ships. The war was brought to a successful conclusion by a glorious common effort, one which in the years to come will be a national pride. I feel very certain that our children will come to regard our participation as memorable for the broad honor and honesty which marked it, for the absence of unfortunate scandal, and for the splendid unity of action which extended to every portion of the nation. It would therefore not only serve little purpose, but would conform ill to our high standards if any person should in the heat of political rivalry seek to manufacture political advantage out of a nationally conducted struggle. We have seen things on too large a scale to listen at this day to trifles or to believe in the adequacy of trifling men. It is that same vision of the bigger outlook of national and individual life which will, I am sure, lead us to demand that the men who represent us in the affairs of our government shall be more than politicians, that they shall subordinate always the individual ambition and the party advantage to the national good. In the long run, the true statesman and the honestly forward-looking party will prevail. Even as the nation entered the war for an ideal, so it has emerged from the war with the determination that this ideal shall not die. It is idle to pretend that the declaration of war of April 6, 1917 was a mere act of self-defense, or that the object of our participation was solely to defeat the military power of the central nations of Europe. We knew then, as a nation, even as we know today, that success on land and sea could be but half a victory. The other half is not won yet. The cry of the French at Verdun, "They shall not pass," and the cheer of our own men in the Argonne, "We shall go through," these were essential glories, yet they are incomplete. To them, we must write the binding finish, "It shall not occur again." For America demands that the crime of war shall cease.
And if only it did. Unfortunately, the war to end all wars, 1914-18, wasn't. And the various countries continue to occupy other countries that don't want them to occupy them, and the nastiness goes on. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. I think it's about shutdown time now. I'll see if I can find my own personal national anthem. Theme of the British Union of Fascists, I don't think would be appropriate. Here we are, the VK3AML national anthem to close. It's just coming up to 1 a.m. in Melbourne. Thank you for all those people who either tuned in on 2 meters or are watching on the YouTube stream. And here is our glorious national anthem to close. VK3AML's own national anthem. For the last 3 hours, you've been listening to VK3AML testing.